Good afternoon. Welcome to Stanford, and welcome to the Governor's Master Plan for Aging Research Subcommittee. Today we're going to be talking about our second goal, livable communities and purpose. But I just want to say thank you to our host, Dr. Carstensen, who has, and her team. Team is the important part.
Jolene is actually the important part.
And Jolene by name, thank you for your leadership in welcoming us here to this obviously world-class center for leadership on aging and just very beautiful, comfortable space to be. So anything you want to say, Laura? And
welcome. Yes, thank you for driving.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have a great critical mass in the room, and we know we have folks also calling in, and we'll be zooming in. I'll kick us off with a welcome, introduction, and meeting overview because, as usual, we have an absolutely packed agenda, and I'm so excited to dive in, focused on livable communities and purpose. Let me just say, let's make sure on the welcome, let's do the logistics. So this is the clicker part that Nancy's helping. Thank you. Just making sure that everyone has their materials, either hard copy in the room or posted online, and there's the information for Zoom, ongoing public comment. And today, as usual, we have a full agenda. We are going to make sure we start with some quick level sets on master plan updates relevant to your work as the research subcommittee, and then dive right in. We always like to hear partner research, what's happening in this field. We like to focus on the master plan dashboard, the main deliverable coming out of this work group, and then, of course, focus on some partner innovation and technology, and very excited to be featuring those folks' public comment and then action items. We've also borrowed the AARP California meeting guidelines to start and end on time. We're doing our best. One person speaks at a time, be fully present, use respectful language and tone, and assume good intentions. Always happy to take friendly amendments to those, but those have been serving us well for the past couple months. I would like to introduce everybody. I have been reminded that I have been remiss in consistently and appropriately calling people how they want to be called. So if you are a doctor and want to be called a doctor, you should do that loud and proud. Doctors are welcome. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves and remind us how you like to be addressed. So the slide will, let's see if the slide, Nancy, can you get us to the subcommittee members?
We are trying.
You are doing it. Thank you so much. Two more. There it is. So let's see if we can do it in order. Welcome, just right on time. Thank you. Dr. Hutt.
Thank you, Kim. Zia Aga from West Health.
Gretchen Alkema from the SCAN Foundation.
Dr. Donna Benton.
Jonathan Betsy.
Jennifer Breen, California Association of Health Facilities.
Laura Carstensen, Stanford, Center on Longevity.
Well, good. Yes, aging was one. It was around all kinds of equity and diversity and inclusion issues, and aging was included. And Shireen and her work in California and San Francisco was lifted up as a national.
I think that is a
We'll get all of your titles right, Shreen, because those are all very important. Stacy, that's a hard act to follow.
Very hard. Stacy Moore, AARP, California.
Superstar, there we go. Is that all the people in the room? And then how about committee members on the phone? How are we doing?
We're doing good. We lost the net connection, but we're back.
Oh, okay. Sure, why don't you read them off at least?
Sophie Bond,
I'm sorry?
Sarah Sophie,
Great.
we've got Karen Lincoln,
Dr. Lincoln, wonderful.
Catherine Heisman,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's it.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, well, that's our welcome and introductions. And then I guess the CDA team, I'm Kim McCoy-Wade from CDA.
I'm Carrie Graham from University of California, San Francisco, and Berkeley, and I'm acting as a consultant to CDA.
And Terry.
I'm Terry Shaw. I'm a consultant on the CDA team.
And we also have other folks in the room. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ken Smith. I work at the Center on Longevity at Stanford for Laura.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm Dallas Streeter. I also work for Center on Longevity.
Developing their equity tool to look at all of this. So we are in the midst of an amazing three-dimensional multicolored process graph that we're going to share soon that explains vertical, horizontal, and diagonal, but trust that you are on track and right on time, and we're so grateful for it. And we also have built in time, you know, more May, June for some of the other technology, future, forward-looking, because those are obviously critical as well. So with that, I think I will just articulate the goal to livable communities and purpose as from the master plan framework that the SAC and team developed this fall to kick us off, and then hand it off to Terry to get us going on updates and with Dr. Carsonson. So livable communities and purpose. The goal here is we will live in and be engaged in communities that are age-friendly, dementia-friendly, and disability-friendly. And we broke that into two objectives. Objective 2.1, kind of the built environment side. California's neighborhoods will have the built environment to fully and meaningfully include older adults, people with disabilities, and people of all ages. And objective 2.2, more about the social environment, Californians will age with lifelong opportunities for social and civic engagement, volunteering, learning, and leadership. And you may know that Goal 2 does not have a formal subcommittee like LTSS. It has a work group that is beginning to work, that is co-chaired by Jenny Chin Hansen. I never know what title Jenny has because she also has many after her name, but I think Jenny's one of our stakeholder advisory committees. And Nina Nina, help me with her last name, Weiler. She, like me, has 3 names, Weiler Harwell, from AARP. So Nina and Jenny are chairing up that work group and just beginning to gather all the recommendations, all the public comment, all that's come in. And of course, we are doing webinar Wednesdays on many of these topics, ranging from housing and transportation. We're just on this morning planning our parts one, as well as isolation and inclusion, civic and social engagement with a volunteerism focus, and leadership. Nothing about us without us. How do we cultivate leadership at the individual, local, and state level for and with aging? So all of that webinar Wednesday, public input, work group with Nina and Jenny, and then crosswalking here with the research, and of course going to equity for their lens as well, is what will happen in the Goal 2, all heading towards May 18th is when we will have both. That's our full stack meeting, which will look at the dashboard generally, wherever you are, dashboard template, dashboard mock-up, dashboard in progress for their feedback, and then Goal 2 will be ready for May 18th. We've added a second, I think it's actually May 28th. Is that second meeting. It says 26, but in my mind, they're 18 and 28, but we'll double check that. Oh, that's your meeting. That's your meeting. That's your meeting.
Yes.
There's a second SAC meeting in May we added because they realized they couldn't do all that at one time. We have dashboard in 1, 2, 3, 4. So the May 18 is actually May 18 and 28, but dashboard and Goal 2 will be May 18th. Yeah. So thank you.
And we should also mention that our fearless leaders and they who are following up with the LTSS dashboard, which is Gretchen, Kathy Kelly, Catherine Keatsman, and Donna, are going on May 10th to the LTSS subcommittee and our cross-pollination efforts to begin presenting both recommendations for the dashboard measures, taking back everything that came out of this committee, and as well as research agenda recommendations. And the other thing is that the other committees are referring recommendations to you. For example, in the LTSS committee, they had some ideas of we should evaluate IHSS every year, or we should collect more caregiver data, or whatever it is, and these are being referred to this committee. So that's another kind of cross-pollination that is happening.
So more to come on the crosswalking, but today I think we're going to focus on this deep dive on Goal 2.
Yes.
Anything else to tee up before Terry and Dr. Carstensen take it away? Okay.
Well, so first I'm going to do just a little bit more detail around some of the updates that Kim just shared. So if we can move forward.
One more.
Keep going. One more.
One more.
Okay, here we are.
Yeah.
So all of these things have already been touched on pretty much in prior meetings and just now. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I did want to, as we are increasingly appreciating that 3D multicolored model that we're all working on, we do want to make sure that we're sharing insights back and forth as much as we can. So this is a light touch on some of the activities that have been going on related to research and data in the Goal 2 arena in the other parts of the NTA process. So I'm just going to touch quickly on the equity work group, and actually Carmen Gibbs will be joining us to talk about that for just a second. I'll highlight some of the webinar Wednesdays that have focused on Goal 2 topics and some learnings out of those that will be of interest to you all. And then I'll give you some updates around the data dashboard and the data gap action plan. All right. So equity work group, as you all by now are well aware, we have a great new equity work group that held its first meeting on February 13th. And in that meeting, they talked about their purpose, some of the key terms. They have an equity tool that they're working on that they'll use to drive a lot of their work. And there was some really great discussion. So I encourage all of you to follow along with that work group. Of course, many of you here have been focusing on equity issues for a very long time, and some of you are also on the equity work group, so would love to hear more from you. But I'm going to turn it over to Carmen real quick just to do a quick debrief on what's going on with the work group. Carmen? Is she on?
Is she unmuted?
Maria's working on it.
Hello? Oh,
Yeah.
hello, how are you?
Great.
Great.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to echo exactly what Terry said. It's an honor to speak with you all because you all have been doing this work for so long in equity. And so, and I'm also very grateful to be on this group because it's just showing how we really want to be intentional about our dedication to equity. And so I just wanted to do two things really quick. First is to read the purpose of our equity work group, which we've been developing, and it's a work in progress, but this is what we have. The purpose of the equity work group is to apply an equity lens to the development, implementation, and evaluation stages of the master plan for aging. The work group includes MPA stakeholder advisory committee members, MPA subcommittee members, and community members. Its task is to thoughtfully consider the perspective of groups that have been historically underrepresented. The Equity Work Group will make recommendations to the MPA Stakeholder Advisory Committee to ensure resulting work products acknowledge bias and actively identify and reduce potential disparities. And this is really important because I think it's well aligned with what the research subcommittee is doing, and we're being thoughtful about our work. And we're also trying, like Terry was saying, we're trying to create an equity tool. So whenever there is a recommendation, whenever we get something from another group, we're trying to think about the growing diversity of California's aging population in terms of racial and ethnic groups, disability, geography, income, immigration status, language, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, family status. And we're going to offer some of these following guiding questions while we review the MPA. And so I just invite you all to think about these questions as you go through the work, which you probably already are thinking about already. But we've just defined it into these 4 points. First, how do the recommendations build on the strengths of the community in culturally appropriate and inclusive ways? Second, is information available in language and in culture? If not, what are the plans to achieve culturally appropriate in language services? 3, is equity integral to the recommendations? What does it look like? And providing examples. And lastly, how are the challenges and disparities facing these communities addressed in the recommendations? Are root causes, organizational barriers addressed, and what will and can be done to reduce them? So these are the foundational points to our equity tool. And with that, I'll turn it back to Terry.
All right, great. Thank you, Carmen.
Let's see if Dr. Benton or other people who are also on equity work group want to add.
No, I think she did an excellent job.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another stream of work that's happening, which is the webinar Wednesdays. And just so everybody knows, every Wednesday at 9:30 to 11, we have a webinar, and it always includes a state partner, a local leader, and at least one SAC member on every call and on every webinar, and including a review of a lot of data and research in the topic area, as well as recounting some of the recommendations that we've already received on the topic. So I do want to encourage all of you to listen into those if you can. If you can't, they are all available afterwards on the web. Presentations, recordings, transcripts are all there. on our Engage CA site. So definitely encourage you all to take a look at those. But I'm going to give you, so you can see these are the ones that we have had and are scheduled in the Goal 2 area. And there's the website if you want to go and get more information. Again, I definitely think you all will find many points of interest in these webinars. And I'm going to highlight just a few from the housing and the transportation webinars. So the housing webinar, which I believe was the second one, third one, something like that.
Third, sounds right.
Third one. The housing webinar, I just want to point out a few of the potential indicators that I heard mentioned on this webinar. And I'm doing that in order to get you all in the mode of thinking about what are those indicators that are important in Goal 2 that we want to focus on and potentially make some recommendations around for inclusion in the dashboard. And so I'm just getting those juices flowing, so to speak, by highlighting some of the indicators that I heard about on the webinar. And I have, this is just my categorization, tried to stack these into that notion of person-level indicators and system drivers that we started talking about in some of our prior meetings. Stacy's going to lead us through some more of this discussion today. And so this is my attempt. There's lots, I'm sure other people would categorize things differently, but you know, just throwing ideas out there. So for example, some of the indicators that came up were indicators around household size, and household composition probably goes along with that too. So potentially we could be looking at metrics along those lines. Of course, part of that is to begin to look at people living alone, for example, and all the implications that flow out of that. So that's an example of a person level indicator that came up. System drivers then, also measures that I would consider in that category that are more about process and inputs than about outcomes. Included things like how well is our housing supply matching up with our housing demands? And spoiler alert, not well. So those kinds of indicators were in this realm that came up in the housing webinar. So again, I encourage you to go back and look at those, but this gives you a flavor of some of the topics that came up, and I'm sure we'll hear more about many of them today as well. Next slide. Similarly, on the transportation webinar, there were what I would consider some examples of person-level indicators and system drivers. So, for example, there was data presented around the number of licensed drivers by age, crash death rates came up on it. You know, so these are all types of outcomes, pretty drastic outcomes in some cases, measures that you all might consider. And again, we'll talk about more of those today. But, and then there were also what I would consider system driver measures that were discussed that had to do with access to different types of options, transportation options, funding for different options, and some infrastructure things like Consolidated Transportation Services Agency designation at the local level. So lots of different types of measures were kind of thrown into the pot, so to speak. And so as we move forward today and with this group overall, we want to try and start capturing the potential indicators, the candidate measures, so to speak. And then this group, we're really looking to you all to bring that down to then the recommendations for what measures should we really be focusing on to align attention and efforts and progress at both the state and the local level over time in accordance with the NPA. Okay, so we're going to talk more about that charge in just a minute. But next set of updates I wanted to do really quickly was around the data dashboard. And there's not a whole lot to update you on there other than to point you to some, again, ideas of potential indicators that could be used and some models of what a dashboard might look like. And in this case, I'm going to highlight the Let's Get Healthy California dashboard. And that is in large part because we are, as we've talked about before, going to be partnering with the California Department of Public Health, which produces this dashboard, to also produce the MPA dashboard. And so I think it's probably a no-brainer that some of the measures that they have, or at least the data set that they already have in Let's Get Healthy, would be leveraged for our purposes. So I wanted to point you to, I'm going to show you some examples of a measure that's already in Let's Get Healthy. I'll do that in just a second. But these are some examples of indicators that they are working on, that they have in their pipeline, that are within the Goal 2 area that may be of interest to this group to think about leveraging for purposes of the dashboard. So they have a couple groups that they're working on, groups of indicators around social factors and environment and infrastructure. And those indicators within those groups include things like data around community cohesion and housing cost burden, which again was one of the ones that came up in the housing webinar as well. And you can see they're using for those, they're looking at both CHIS and ACS data for those purposes. And part of the reason why I mentioned that is to highlight for you all that those are data sets that are kind of already available, and that CDPH is already used to working with. So to the extent we can leverage those data sets on measures that aren't currently in the Let's Get Healthy dashboard, but for purposes of the MPA, I think that's a likely place to focus some attention.
Can I ask a technical question?
Of course.
Does American Community Survey have a California cut, or is it regional?
No, it has California. I believe it also has does it have county?
It's national.
It's
national, and you can actually break it down very fine,
Very
like
small.
to county level.
Yeah.
You can't take it all the way to county.
It's even
You
smaller.
can take it smaller. You
Yeah,
can't. Down to
in LA
the
for sure.
Okay, it's big enough to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
To do at least some of that. And I mean, thanks for raising that question, because again, consistent with our discussion around what the equity work group is focused on, and the work that we of course want to do here, is to really pay attention to the richness of the data and the ability to really, slice and dice it, as I like to say, in different ways in order to be able to look at different populations through different lenses, and hopefully even be able to combine some of those measures. So we'll talk about that more going forward, but yes.
Just a quick question. So I know the ACS is public. Is California Health Interview Survey also public?
So my understanding is that, yes, there are many, many public files available through CHIS. And my understanding is that the Let's Get Healthy California dashboard, I believe, is almost entirely leveraging publicly available data, as in there aren't specific MOUs necessarily between CDPH and whoever, in this case UCLA, in order to get at data that isn't already public. They're leveraging publicly available files. Okay, any questions on that before? Okay, so really quickly, just to give you one example of the way that Let's Get Healthy presents some of these measures and the ability to drill down on some of these questions that we've just been discussing. This indicator happens to be around walking to work. Not necessarily exactly on topic, but
Related.
adjacent. And what I really wanted to point out to you here is that this indicator has the top level is a set of very clear, focused numbers that represent how are things today, what's the baseline that we're working from, and where are we trying to go in the future. So that notion of really trying to keep an overall big picture of where we are on a given measure is in there. And so that's an approach that we can consider for purposes of our dashboard. And then moving forward, you can see then underneath that measure, you can then, in this particular one, you can drill down and see data broken out. That's a little fuzzy, but you can see it's broken out by race, and is it also ethnicity here, or is it just race? Yes, race and ethnicity. Sorry, it's not crystal clear there. So you can drill down and see the numbers broken out. And then next slide, you can also see them broken out by geography. So what would be lovely is if we could get to the point of being able to do both geography and race and ethnicity. Right now, I'm not sure the extent to which that's doable, but anyway, just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that might be possible in a dashboard And I'm just going to highlight for you right now, my major caveat. These are examples. We may not do anything that's exactly like this, but it gives you some idea of directions to go. And October 1 is very close. So we will do as good a job as we can by October 1, and probably what that will entail is some data and some placeholders or proxies or indicators of where the dashboard will go in the future, because we're not quite there yet. So just wanted to manage expectations a bit there. Okay, next slide. So last update, really very quickly, the data gap action plan. This is really what I'm charged with doing. And essentially what it is me running alongside you all as you are doing your work to try and capture specific to data, so not research writ large, but data specifically, and really thinking about the dashboard. What limitations do we have? So why can't we fill in all of those things that we would love to be able to fill in? And then options for how we can fill them in over time. And so we're going to come back to some very similarly, this is kind of aligned with the goals of this group, which is why I'm saying that I'm going to be following along behind you and catching what I can. But that's where we're headed. Those were the updates that I had. Did I run long? A little bit. Okay.
You and Laura now.
Okay.
Any pause, questions, comments from subcommittee members on, do you feel sufficiently downloaded on all things oriented? Okay, carry on.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next slide. So we're calling this an update, but it's almost like a level set for all of us and a reminder of what is the charge for this group, given all the other activity that's going on, and given that October 1 is, coming. Want to just remind us all of what we're here to really focus on. And so I'm going to do kind of a high-level overview, and then Dr. Carstensen is going to dig in and provide you some examples of what that means concretely, or what it could mean, what it could look like concretely. So, so overall, your charge really is twofold. The first, and arguably more immediate charge, maybe, is really what are the indicators that we want to put into the dashboard. And you can think of that both in terms of what do we have the capability to put in there now, and so we want to leverage that and focus on that now, as well as ideally over time, we'd like to have these things in there. We can't do it today, but over time. And so those indicators should be able to tell us where are we now, where do we want to be in 10 years, like that Let's Get Healthy example that I showed you, those sort of high level things. And of course, reducing disparities is hopefully one of the things that we can begin to assess making use of the dashboard. So really, to me, what I think of that is if we could have our state and local decision makers focus on only a small number of things, what would those things be? That's really the charge for you all from a data perspective. And then what we know, of course, is that we're not going to have a perfect picture right now. And so what are the recommendations on the research and data topics do we want to think about, does this group want to recommend in order to get a clearer and better picture and richer picture over time? So that's your charge. Indicators, longer term recommendations in a nutshell. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carstensen. Thank you again for hosting us here today. And I think I've already started talking about the different techniques that you're highlighting to enrich our picture over time. So take it away.
Great, thank you very much. And welcome everybody to Stanford. Thanks for making the drive. I know that drive, so I'm really appreciative. Yeah, I've in listening to everybody talk in the last few meetings, I keep thinking that we have an opportunity here to design and implement a kind of a grand research project that would allow us to get a deeper understanding of what works how different factors are related to one another, and to even be able to model a priori how we might best allocate funds so that the monies that are invested in the state in various programs are addressing the most vulnerable groups, are improving disparities as opposed to exacerbating disparities and so on. And I think there are models that can help us. I've had several conversations. You know, I've talked to Terry, I've talked to Carrie, I've talked to a number of you, also Lydia and Mrs. Salas, offline some about what we might be able to do. And so I start daydreaming and thinking about, well, the resources we have in California, and we have world-class researchers who know how to use a variety of very powerful analytic methods, and we might be able to, many of whom, by the way, are on this committee, and we may be able to pull together that expertise, form some kind of a network that would oversee a large project. That's what I'm suggesting today we might consider recommending. So this is independent of the dashboard, which has a deadline and is going to go forward and has to be limited by whatever's available today, to say, how could we do something bigger and better ultimately? The kind of thing I'm thinking would take a decade to really be able to implement. But we would be able to say what works in different counties, what works for different populations, and what is the constellation of interventions that we need in order to really make progress for the groups that most need it. So that's the idea. The one model that I want to present briefly, it's not the only one, but it's one that I think could be useful in guiding our work, is a project that is referred to as the Future Elderly Model. It's a microsimulation model where researchers make predictions about different what-if scenarios. What if we reduce disparities in congestive heart failure by race? What would that do, and how much money would that save? That's the kind of thing that can be done here, and I'll show you some numbers momentarily. By the way, I want to be clear. It says since 2004, we have answered. I'm not part of that we at all. These are other researchers in California. Dana Goldman at USC, Jay Bhattacharya, who's here at Stanford, have really led the development of this future elderly model. And what they initially did with it, by the way, was to examine what if, like, what if we cured cancer? What would that do for life expectancy? And what would the savings be? And by the way, the answer to that is not much on either variable. That the only way to really do that would be to slow aging itself because of this kind of whack-a-mole. You cure cancer and people get heart disease instead, and that costs more. So, you know, but these are the kinds of simulations that they've applied. And more recently, they've also been working with what they call the Future America model, which are simulations that take the entire population into consideration as opposed to just focus on people, say, today in their 50s, projecting out 10 or 20 years and saying what the elderly population will look like. So if I can have the next slide, thank you. I may have already said what I was going to say anyway here. Yeah, these two different models, what they do. The other advantage of this, in fact, you can go to the next slide, is that it allows you to take multiple risk factors and data sources into consideration. So again, if we use the data dashboard, we'll have a descriptive kind of, this is how many people walked, this is how many people last year, this year, and we can follow that out. But I don't have to tell anybody around this table, there are lots of interactions in these variables so that it would allow you to put a lot of variables together and see what constellation actually will best predict what the outcomes are. If I can go to the next slide, I'll give you an example of how FEM, Future Elderly Model, has been used to examine what would happen if we made significant progress in treating congestive heart failure. So what you're seeing in the red bars here are the percentage of people in their 50s, so say 50 to 60, it's 52 to 60, something like that, but roughly 50 to 60, who have congestive heart failure, and the first bar all the way to the left. These are those people who are going to go on to get congestive heart failure. What you're seeing in the yellow bar up is those people who now have a diagnosis of congestive heart failure. What you see in the the second two panels there are the percentages broken down by sex and race for blacks and whites. And what you see here is that you've got higher rates of congestive heart failure in African American populations than in white populations. We see earlier onset of congestive heart failure in African Americans compared to white Americans, and that we also see differences in disability exacerbation by race and sex. So the group here that you're seeing having the most limitations, and these are ADL limitations that you're seeing, so functional limitations before the diagnosis, functional limitations after the diagnosis. So what you see is that Black females are most affected by congestive heart failure. So if we were to say, we're going to do an intervention that's going to reduce the limitations associated with congestive heart failure, ideally treat congestive heart failure, the group that would benefit the most are Black females. And so this is the kind of model that would allow us, I think, to begin to think, when you think about what the interventions from the other groups are going to be proposed, which ones are we going to pursue and which ones are we not going to pursue? Again, I don't have to tell anybody here that often what happens with interventions is we go in with an intervention that's effective at the population level, but it turns out it's most effective with people who are the most advantaged to begin with, and it doesn't actually address people who are the least advantaged in the population. So this kind of a simulation model could help the state think about how to invest their dollars in ways that would reduce disparities as opposed to exacerbate them. And if you go to the next slide, and that's my last slide, this tells you the gain in life expectancy years, again, broken down by sex and race, with an intervention that would treat congestive heart failure. In addition to the life years that this is giving you, and that is considerable life years that would be added, the savings are estimated to be somewhere between 200 million and 400 million. So there are billions. These numbers matter, these zeros. And again, it gives you some sense of the economics of this. We don't have an unlimited, no state has an unlimited budget, so where are we going to use these dollars to most effectively help people who need it most? That's what the model can do. And if we were to pursue something like this, it's a big effort. It's a big multi-year effort, and it's something that I would argue we should pursue if and we can engage people who are experts in this, and there are a lot of them already in the state. We might draw in experts outside of the state, but they're here. I mean, we have lots of people who work on these kinds of questions in California, and I think that I've talked to Jay Bhattacharya and Dana Goldman. They just wrote back a short, I'm in. If the state's going to do this, I'd start working for this. So I do think it'd be something that people would find rewarding, and they would be willing to commit some significant time to doing it. I think it can make California really the bellwether state for not only intervening, but intervening effectively and understanding what worked and what didn't work. So that's my pitch.
Perfect.
So just to pull the theme through of the charge of this group, I think what you heard Dr. Carstensen say was really both aspects of our charge, right? One is she pointed to some indicators that we might consider paying attention to. For example, life expectancy broken down by lots of different factors. And she also pointed to a research recommendation, a long-term recommendation to improve our ability to appropriately plan for and evaluate our interventions. So that's the kind of discussion that we're going to keep having throughout the day and as the group moves forward. And so on that first part of the charge around selecting our indicators, you all are going to have to think about how to do that, and there's lots of different ways that you could go about doing that. But I wanted to offer up one potential model, which is the set of criteria that CDTH uses for their Let's Get Healthy California model. And this is shorthand. They have a much richer tool that they use. But in short, there's a set of subjective criteria that are basically about, are we measuring what matters? And then a set of objective criteria, and how well are we measuring that? Is there a benchmark for this? Is the data really strong, including does it allow us to look at all those different demographics and spatial and temporal aspects that we want to look at? And is it timely and sustainable over time? So I think this is useful to keep in mind as we move forward, to think about how do we pick our measures, but also to think about what kind of recommendations do we want to make to improve these things over time. So are there recommendations that we can make to make that data more sustainable over time? Are there some things that we want to point to? So that's it for me. Yes, go ahead, please.
Terry, thank you both, and couldn't agree more. I'd just like to raise, and for those on the phone, this is David Lindemann. I'd just like to raise an additional consideration. First, fantastic idea to apply this process for the 10-year approach, being able to use it as a macro model, be able to use it as an international opportunity to set the stage. I'd just like to share, rather than, in addition to identifying indicators at this point for short-term solutions and building the dashboards, I think it's critical to look at getting as much data as possible now. Because if you look at it, I think the emphasis could be put on data provenance, management, storage, because in the longer term, where we are, what's been accomplished in the last 3 years with AI and machine learning from our colleagues here in California is already rapidly advanced what was supposed to take 10 to 20 years. We are moving at such a pace so that I think it's critical to gather volume, as much data as possible, that would allow for future analytics rather than anticipating initial dashboards and indicators, which are going to be important and very good to have. But I think more emphasis that could be done this year to collect volumes of data, ensure its accuracy and cleanliness and management will allow for some amazing new analytic properties. Also, we'd be able to bring in the private sector. And these, we're doing seeing a lot of fintech analyses, risk analyses with a lot of insurance companies, global insurance companies that we're working on in this area, that we can't even anticipate what we'll be able to learn 5, 7, 10 years out. So I would just like to reinforce getting as much data as possible, and the department being able to have that, working with other departments, because the opportunities for the research teams will only grow.
Can I just strongly agree with that, and also say, I think it really would benefit us to have a serious meeting about what variables we care about and what might be available now and what new data collection needs to be. And unless and until we have a sense of what we're trying to understand, you can't really narrow that set of variables at all. So I'm just with you because there's so much there, and with AI, we're going to have a lot more.
It's an amazing opportunity, and one that will could put not only the department, but again, as Laura's nicely said, put the state in the lead for setting models and identifying these, and the compute power, the speed with which we're able to now do these analyses. We're working with a number of AI teams from Silicon Valley companies that are they're looking at new algorithms that are cross-cutting that could be applied here. It's truly an incredible opportunity that the state has to set the stage for future research.
So, I just have a question. That was excellent. Thank you very much. And I concur 100% with this idea of gathering significant data now so that we can learn from it later. I think there's another framing question, though, and I've talked to Carrie a little bit about this, and you mentioned it, Laura, on I think it was on one of the prior slides. What do we want the outcome to be in 10 years? And I'm sure that this is what researchers ask all the time, so that's not, I'm not saying something you've never thought about. But if we think about the master plan for aging,
what is it that we want? Do we want longer life expectancy that's a year longer? Do we want everyone to have accessible housing? You know, what are the big, bold goals? I don't know if a year longer life expectancy is a big, bold goal. It's an interesting opportunity, but I don't know if it's a big, bold goal. So what are the 2 or 3 really big, bold goals that we should be focusing on that's going to inform then the data dashboard, notwithstanding this need to gather data as much as we can? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I personally don't think extending life expectancy is really the top goal here, but it's extending functional capacity or, you know, sort of healthy longevity. One of those slides, I think I wasn't clear on it, was really, it was the 3 or greater ADL. That's what was being reduced with interventions and congestive heart failure. So it was really about functional ability and how that would disproportionately benefit Black women more than any other age group if we were able to do that. So that's, I mean, to some degree, I mean, I think these are value statements. I can't agree with you more. And also, again, just like variables, I think we need to spend time saying to have the conversation about what are we after. And then other things fall into place. We know what the variables are we need. We know what it is that we're trying to predict. But we haven't done a lot of that, I think, in this group. And it would be good to really be able to say, this is our goal, that by, you know, 2030 or whenever the year is, we want to see a certain percentage of improvement in ADLs, IADLs. It could be reducing costs. I mean, I think that we, again, I don't know the answers off the top of my head, and they are value statements, but I very much appreciate having a conversation about exactly what you're raising.
It might be one approach would be to ask people what they want. And I don't know if any of these surveys have really addressed that question. As you age, what are the things you'd most like? To be healthy, to extend your lifespan, to be able to travel. And we can probably come up with a relatively short list and find out what people do want. Maybe it's okay.
Well, and you know, at the highest level, the probably too high level, that's what the framework is trying to do, right? Is to say that one of the goals is about having health as you have more functional needs, right? One is about staying healthy. One is not having your money run out on you. And one is keeping connections. If we could do those 4 things in California, we're good. I mean, at the risk of being super glib in a research room.
Right.
No, that's exactly.
That's complicated because we have our objectives. You know, goal 1 is people will be able to live where they choose and get the care they need. Okay, we can come up with measures for that. But we also have the other work groups working on goal 1 and fiddling with that. So we have this thing where Terry was talking earlier about we're not waiting to work on this until the other groups have settled on what they think the objectives are. But we do have the framework to begin with.
Right. So, sorry, just to make that very concrete then, the point is, if those are our 4 big areas, how will we know if we're doing well? How will we know? What does success look like, as Jeannie put it in our last meeting? How can we focus on knowing whether we're succeeding on those points?
So not just the indicator, but the benchmark, but the target.
So we have Gretchen and Donna.
Lots of discussion.
Sure, and I'll keep it brief, but I think I like the evaluation criteria that are up on the slide. I think one of the things that I'm super mindful of is, in addition to this, my perspective of this work is that it's a master plan for aging and not a master plan for old people. So I kind of say that regularly. So we continue to kind of keep that aging focus, like the trajectory of life experience as part of it. And then it's also not a master plan for Medicaid, Medi-Cal, sorry. In that sense, and what I mean that particularly is that as we think about indicators, like one of the things we did with the long-term services support scorecard with AARP is say, okay, what are those indicators that are across all 50 states, so we can rank where states are relative to each other, right? So you have to have that pool, and are modifiable by some kind of state action.
Right.
Really
Right.
important. So I think, okay, what's the parlay on this when I think about the indicators? It's that they are, that there's information that we can glean across populations, right? And the equity group is helping us think about the way in which we define populations in various configurations, and that are modifiable by probably state behavior, local behavior, private sector behavior, individual behavior, family behavior, and deciding where are we relative to all of those particular pieces. And I lay that all out because, I want to make sure that when I'm talking about indicators, I don't make an assumptive statement that the table would think I believe that the state needs to do something different every single moment in order to modify that metric. Because I think there are a lot of things that are maybe within the realm of state or local modification. Like we're going to talk about transportation policy. We're probably going to talk about urban planning policy a bit today, relative to, housing aspects on private property. Like those things are not just about what the state architecture either creating or lifting, barriers, but also what the locals can do. So the idea that whatever we set up at the indicator level at the state, LA County could then look at all of that relative to LA County and make that same kind of statement about how LA County residents are doing. So I just want to add that into the, and I don't know how we want to describe that in the indicator evaluation, but that it's modifiable. That measure is modifiable by different forces, which includes the state, but it's not exclusive to the state behavior or financing or regulatory framework. That's my thought.
Just briefly, I like that we want to collect data and have benchmarks, but I know that we've been discussing gaps. And the fact that right now it's going to be difficult for some of our data to even say, how are we going to reduce it by, 10% or whatever, or double something, when we don't even have a baseline. So I think that but that doesn't mean that we should not be measuring it now for the future, even if we can't predict. So part of our recommendations, I think, have to deal with this lack of data and a recommendation of, okay, this is what we want to put on the table for the future, for the data group. So I think this is going to be a long-term recommendation as a data.
Well, and that's part of why we commissioned a data gap report to be parallel to data dashboard, because, the thing we say all the time is this is really going to be dashboard 1.0. This is really like organizing and presenting what we already have better to help shine a light on these gaps and then do some analysis on where to prioritize and sequence next. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just cut the line.
Diaz and David?
So I basically want to echo the conversation that, in my mind, using a framework like this to help identify the key, what I'm calling beacons that you want to change. These are things you want to aspire to do. And then to find the gaps, and that's what I think what, David, you're talking about. So I'll use an example. We do healthcare research using Medicare data. Medicare does not measure frailty. And that's a very important thing for seniors. But you can use machine learning to look at all the other data that Medicare does collect to see if it can predict or identify people who are frail. So now you fill the data gap using your intelligent algorithm. Because we can't go back in Medicare and say, well, give us frailty index. It doesn't exist. So I think it sort of comes together. At the first level, we need to identify these big beacons and these gaps and align everybody around that. And then research, which will take longer, has to follow to help fill those gaps. You can't ever collect all this data.
Right.
And it's not cost effective.
Right.
You have to come up with ways to impute, calculate, whatever, predict, fill the gaps.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Just a very quick one to pick up on Jeannie and not giving you a heart attack, Terry.
I know, I'm feeling it.
From a process perspective, would it be helpful to, I'm not sure on the timeline you showed us earlier, where we will be and when those dashboards come out, but it does seem that if there was an effort made to identify these main areas and each of the subgroups put forward their recommended point sooner rather than later, say within a month, that could be then circulated and reviewed continuously by the research committee so that it's not, you're getting up to a deadline and then trying to do modifications. I think if that way there could be actually a check on what are the is there agreement on the major outcomes? What are some of the models? And you'd also be able to identify some of those gaps, or this area may have some wonderful dashboards already in place. This other one may, or models or data. Others may take a great deal more time. But I'm just curious, from process, is it sooner rather than later that this should be brought forward?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One's already in process, 2's in process today, and 3 goes in process in the middle of March. And 4 is running late, but I'll say something that they disagree with me all the time. It's economic security and safety, which we know a lot of, like poverty measures and income measures. I never want to say they're more clear-cut and easy. Nothing is easy, but I think we've done some more work on poverty measures than LTSS measures. So I think we were a little okay. And similarly, abuse and neglect, we're kind of scanning the field for abuse and neglect, and it's a little trickier because of lots of things there. That's a tricky one. But anyway, it is what it is. 4 is coming a little bit later, but the idea is you bring all of them sort of where you are in May and then bring them together June and July with kind of final to us in August.
Yep, and I think this is just going to your point, this is going to happen on a rolling basis. We're just going to keep rolling, and it is also going to involve feedback. So, for example, we're going to be presenting, as was mentioned earlier, we're going to be presenting to the LTSS committee some recommendations coming out of the research committee meeting back in January, and they'll provide some feedback, and we'll chew on that. And equity work group is going to take a look at things, and they'll send feedback. You know, there's just, and as a practical matter, I can tell you right now, when I start working with CDPH around getting down to brass tacks of what's going in the dashboard, they're going to go, you know, we can get this far, we can't get that. So there's going to be feedback in that way too. So it's all, we're just going to keep iterating.
And, you know, if you're not on a work group and would like one of these goals, I named the people who are LTSS. We have the people today, Stacy, Jeannie, David, and Laura, who are goal 2. We have Aga on goal and Janet on goal 3. So if, you know,
you're feeling left out.
You're feeling left out and you want to be the leader of starting to put together these templates for measures for a goal 3 or goal 4, just look at me in a certain way and I will put you on that group.
Well,
you don't even have to volunteer. I will put you on the group.
And people on the phone as well. And I want to, also in that same loop is Dr. Franklin and Dr. Benton, who are on the equity work group at the April meeting. So just all of those loops.
Right.
But yeah.
Don't talk to me at break or you'll get in the
A question, maybe I'm the only one who doesn't understand, but when it was in response to David, to your comment to Gary about worrying about the speed, what I'm proposing is a separate recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have the different goals, but there's also different, there's broad research agenda.
Absolutely.
And then there's research agenda under the different goals too.
That's right. On this kind of a timeline,
Well, and absolutely, but the recommendation can be done on this timeline.
Exactly.
All right. And so I'm hoping on the March 18th SAC, this group comes forward and says, May 18th, I can't panic. May 18th SAC, this group is saying, here's what we think about dashboard, but also here's what we're seeing about gaps. Also, here's what we're seeing about a 10-year moonshot.
That's right.
Not too, like, you tell your story on all these different fronts. Yes. And we've also, I should just, we've also asked David to come to the SAC May 28th to kind of blow everyone's mind with technology. Because we think that's a total cross-cutting piece, and we want to make sure everyone has that, not just more, it's also different in ways you can't even imagine yet. So we're trying to kind of bring that great content that we heard at Citrus last month to everybody as well, and that's as soon as we can figure out the scheduling. I know we are wildly behind schedule, but
it's amazing. A really good discussion, and we had the question and answer a little later that we can cut back on, so we're okay. But I do think we should jump into research from our partners, and we're going to start with David Ragland from my own UC Berkeley, who is from the Safe Transportation Research and Education Center at Cal, and He'll be talking about transportation solutions for an aging population.
Okay, I borrowed that, just changed it slightly from you guys' original model.
Oh, good.
Anyway. So first of all, I'm approximately in the middle of the group we're aiming for. So you have to give me an A for figuring out the map. I'm looking for north.
I know, I found that confusing too.
There's people around the campus that say this guy's frantically trying to find this building.
Yeah.
But anyway,
It's a big campus.
I got a lot of, only took a couple of inquiries. So I got it. Thank you for that. So transportation, Safe Track, the research group at UC Berkeley, we've been in existence for about 20 years. We support maybe 10, 12 students, graduates, and have a staff of about 10 or 12, and have several hundred reports and things published, and for Caltrans and for various state agencies. So you can find that on our on the website. So you could take a look. And so transportation data. So we focused mostly on safety, but we have done quite a bit of stuff both within and also with other colleagues on mobility. But these are just some examples, some data sources. And out of these, some indicators could come, out of each of them, indicators could come, and some have already been proposed. We know quite a bit. We've used all these sources of data, know quite a bit about them. It's important to realize when you start with a set of data, you've got to look to where it comes from and look at what the potential errors could be. That's the very first step, is you take a really good look. And we've made offers or proposals to the various users or, origins of these various data for improvements. And we have some ideas about doing checks before, like quality checks, missing values out of stuff like that. Agencies don't usually want to know too much about that, but that's something really to look at in all of these. So, traffic injury.
Tell us when to advance your slides.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at this one. Sorry. Yeah. Next slide, and then that's the example. Sorry, I'm looking here.
Yeah.
It's like I'm having to look that way, but
Sorry.
no, that's fine. Go to the next next slide. And this happens to be injury, and we want to get it age related. So we have our SWITRS is the statewide integrated traffic record system that comes from Highway Patrol. We download that every year. We get it. We do some quality checks. Shattuck Avenue spelled 16 different ways, and we fix that. And you'd be surprised how much that plays into it. And we do we do geocoding, which hadn't been done at state level until 2 or 3 years ago. And we've been doing that for 15 years, and we have that now on a tool called TIMS, which you can look up. It's free. You do have to register, but you'll get password back in 30 seconds. We hope. Many agencies use this to prepare data for proposals and things like that. American Community Survey, we get population data from. And next slide. Sorry, I better keep on this. So this we've done more traffic crash analyses than probably anybody in the universe for multiple state agencies and for papers and so on. This happens to be traffic fatalities per 100,000 by age, right? We just took the crash data and the population data and put it together in this case. And it's surprising to note, not everybody knows this, but the fatalities go up toward 75, 80, and so forth, till they reach teenage years, which is not ordinarily known. Doesn't necessarily mean older drivers are causing these. We're talking about now fatalities. And that's actually a big issue. We'll get to that in a second. Then go to the next slide. This is pedestrian fatalities for 100,000. And it's almost, shocking. And a lot of this, some of this, both this and the last slide, some are due to behavior, but some is also due to susceptibility. And in studies, in controlled studies, an 80-year-old man, for example, has about 4, 5, 6 times the chance of dying, holding constant, than a 20-year-old, holding constant the energy transfer in a crash. So there's a lot of susceptibility issues here too that one would need to pull out. There's issues of behavior, susceptibility that we need to separate, and that's possible to do. There's some studies that do that. But anyway, major issues, and we can easily create indicators for these. These are fairly constant over 10 years, and we just do the timeline, decide whether to project forward or how much. Going to the next one, system drivers, for example, occupant and pedestrian safety. There is, maybe some of you know, a strategic highway safety plan that Caltrans organizes. Multiple state agencies participate in advocacy groups. AARP has been involved in this, AAA at different times. This is the third round. I had a meeting this morning. One reason I was late, but they went to 11 o'clock. But it was the older driver challenge area. And we talked a lot about the very issues that could feed into here. Go to the next slide. Are just some strategies from the second SHSP round. That's ending. We're going into the third round. And you can see AARP was on the previous SHAP round and so on. And you see San Diego Trans and et cetera, DMV. The stakeholder outreach rivals this process. In terms of the attempt to get input from both agencies and also users and people in the state. So you could just see determine availability of mature driver safety education programs. Rural, that was a big issue brought up this morning. That's another issue of equity, is delivering these things to rural areas. And that was at least a half an hour discussion this morning about how we do that, and so on. And there's many more. I mean, this is an example of their strategies and global and system drivers, I guess, if you will. So there's an opportunity for input into this process, and they may be contacting some of you about further involvement or at least collaboration. So the thought is we can push together aging drivers, test our challenge area, and this process to protect both and also the pedestrian challenge areas, to coordinate in some way, maybe not the exact very similar indicators, maybe not the same system drivers, but to push in the same direction. And so anyway, and exchange information. So anyway, there may be some contact that some of you may be getting from this group. It turns out we're on the same sort of cycle, CSHSP. They want to wrap up their recommendations in the next several months. Okay, next slide. Mobility. So that's the other area. So we put a lot of focus on mobility, but travel behavior and mobility, and the California Highway Transportation Service has been mentioned. Go to the next one, for example, and that data is available. It's been done about every 6 or 8 or 10 years. By the way, there's sort of a political issue about whether it's going to be done. What I hear is that it's supposed to be done, but there's some delay in the next household travel survey. So that may be an issue that we might want to. But anyway, this is just some data from Contra Costa County, and you can see the vast majority of trips are motor vehicle. Now, Contra Costa is highly suburban, but it's not unlike a lot of the states. So not totally representative. If you go to the 80 old group, more passengers, well, that group has the equal amount of travel, but they tend to be passengers as opposed to drivers. And that's a shift that many studies have found. Very little transit, which diminishes with age, and that's something we can explore. We've done safe routes to transit and things like that to try to determine why that is, but you can go into that. That's something else. Paratransit, walking, yep, some walking, but if you know Contra Costa County or almost any area that you live in, except downtown San Francisco and a couple of places, there aren't many places to walk except for walking your dog. or walking for pleasure. And they do have great trails, by the way. And that's the place where I walk. Anyway, that's a real quick snapshot that's pretty consistent across the state. The next slide. Okay. Number of trips, they have a travel day, by the way, when they're supposed to record what travel they do on a particular day. And that's what this data is. So with not low income, you can see there's a gradient in the proportion of people make no trips. I'm sorry, I read that wrong initially. And then with low income, so we have we talked about interactions a little while ago. There are huge interactions between income and other variables, as well as ethnicity, race, ethnicity, and other variables. And those are really important to look at. I concur with that. Next slide, I guess. Factors, well, this is just kind of a sum of research that many people have done. Factors leading to travel, age, their driver's license. Living alone is actually a big feature. And in the demographic trends, there's a higher proportion of people living alone with age, and it's predominantly women, not totally, obviously, but because husbands die sooner demographically, and poor health and disability, of course, these are all pretty well known, well documented. Okay, next slide. Okay, transportation deficiency. This is kind of a core concept, I think, anyway. And one of our students did this, on one hand, we have access to jobs and destinations by these different modes. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, we have needs, people with needs. Elderly, people with disabilities, zero vehicle households. And the idea is to be able to identify what the deficiencies are and be able to link them with the appropriate modes. That's the underlying strategy of this. And if you go to the next slide, the same student did an interesting project. Fortunately, she graduated. Students have a way of graduating. But anyway, that's life, I guess. But anyway, she took various data that we've talked about at the census block level, let's just elderly population. I mean, that's where she started. And distributed by census block group for Contra Costa County. You can do this for the state level. The data's a little, I mean, you've got to be careful with the weighting and stuff like that in the sampling, but you can do that. And it's pretty much straight from the census. Next slide is transportation need. And this has to do single age. I think she took over 65 here. And zero vehicle household, and several disability, several variables like that, and did them all at the census block level. So then if you go further, I don't have the slide for this, but you can determine transportation deficiency at the census block level. And the thing to do with that, what do we do with that? Okay, the thing to do that is feed to local agencies that are coordinating transit. That's the next slide. This is transportation deficient block groups. Yeah, you can see in Contra Costa County, there's several. These happen to be the high level along Highway 4 and in Richmond are several areas that are particularly. Now, okay, the next. Okay, now, this, I think, is a major system driver. And the FAST Act, which is the federal transportation bill now, Fixing America's Transit, or I should remember the exact title of that. But anyway, it's the major transportation bill. Surface transportation, that's it. Sorry. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, okay. But basically, it's a coordinated transportation plan focusing on able, aging, and disabled populations. It's required for federal funding. This is for the San Francisco Bay MTC, and it's quite extensive. They go into funding, they go, and so on. It turns out every MPO in the state has this plan, as well as also the rural transportation planning organizations. They're very detailed. The underlying, go to the next slide. the underlying idea, because you can't say that, should have blown that up, is to coordinate the various transportation options, all the way from ride-hail to transit, to vehicle, to NEMT, and so on. Instead of having to be separate things over here, as they are, is to make sure they're, first of all, they're coordinated. Secondly, to link those to the needs, to identify where the needs are in a county, which are highly geographically distributed in ways that you can predict, as we've shown. And we had a person from Contra Costa County Planning talking about this, and he said, the major issue is that maybe it's how difficult it is to coordinate that. And he put the slide up saying politics, politics, politics. But okay, so here's a role for the master plan, is to be able to recognize that these mechanisms or plans exist and to put some pressure, or at least, I don't know, inspiration or something, so that the counties are able to move forward with coordinating these various modes and linking them to the populations of need, primarily. So that's sort of the underlying mission, or I guess vision of this, that we can link in, we can use data to link in and support the coordinated transportation plans that exist all out California, and tens of millions of dollars are being spent in some ways that we might have an influence over.
Great.
So
Thank you very
that's
much.
it. Is that almost?
You were
Right on.
right on.
Oh my God.
You were amazing.
Okay, there's one more slide, but it, sorry, I take your paycheck. This is just one of our system drivers. We've done probably 200 community assessments of pedestrian, bike, safety in communities, including we're doing about 15 of them in tribal groups this summer and this fall. And and in addition, we've done things like safer routes for older, things of that sort, that sort of reflect what some people here are doing in like AAA and AARP are doing in large, So anyway, that's it.
Thank you.
So I think do we need to do a break for the captioner at 2:30? Let's do 30, so maybe we'll do a 10-minute break for
Well,
the
I guess that's the
captioner?
question, or do we?
They need them every 90 minutes, I've been told.
The question is, the alternative is to have Dr. Parsonson do that, and that piece is not captioned, or to take a break and come back.
Whatever you.
If you don't mind your piece not being captioned, we could keep going.
Oh, sure, whatever you like.
Okay.
And then with that said, if people need to take breaks, as I did, there's hot tea and coffee and water and cookies in the kitchen, and restrooms, so people should, without walking out while you're about to talk. Sorry. Maybe we need a bio. We need a break, 5-minute break.
Okay, we're gonna take a break.
We need a break. Once I said cookies.
I
Everybody wants
No one's in the
Yeah,
room.
that's
not too bad.
Yes.
Well, David, I went to, Panama Street.
Yeah, I finally got
Oh,
there.
this was, I parked right here, right, the closest parking lot, and I thought, oh, I'll be there by 1 minute. I walked, I put in my
All right, we're going
Very good.
to reconvene. I unmuted the phone. Maria's got the Zoom going, and our captioner will be coming back. And we will thank again our host for not just the beautiful room, but the snacks and food. Thank you very much. Always important for a 4-hour research meeting. Good for cooking. Excellent. And without further ado, Dr. Carstensen, yes?
Yes.
All right, take it away.
Yay. What I wanted to share with you is another data presentation approach that we've used at the Stanford Center on Longevity, and this might actually, I look at Terry, inform the current one in a couple ways. So let me show you what we've done with this. Our aim was to be able to predict whether Americans are on the right track or the wrong track where healthy longevity is concerned. And at the beginning of this project, what we did was to convene about 30 experts from different domains. And Gretchen, I thought of you, your remarks here. We charged them over the course of a day to identify variables for which there is empirical evidence that they influence the quality of life and as people age and are modifiable. This is where, so theoretically, I don't mean to say any of these factors are easily modifiable, but it's not like the zip code of your birth, which of course is a great predictor, which I took you to say, it's like, what can we do about it at this point in time? And it turns out that yeah, probably, my phone rings so rarely that I don't know how to turn it off.
It's great to dance.
But I just listen to the music, so there we go, great. They fell into 3 different areas. One is kind of fitness, one is financial security, and one is social engagement. From that, variables like, do you talk to your neighbors? Do you have meaningful conversations with close loved ones? And these are the kinds of variables. And healthy living, it's do you exercise? Do you eat healthy foods, fruits and vegetables? And then financial security, it had things like, do you have an emergency fund? We didn't want to know like how much people have in their retirement account. We wanted to know how it would influence their function on a day-to-day basis. And then what we did is to break it down so that we could describe Americans by age group. So you can't see this very well, but it's 25 to over 75. In one case, it's lower because we didn't have an older age group, so it's slightly different. But what you can see here is that for financial security, for example, people in the middle of life are doing best. And these are by expert recommended amounts. So it's the percentage of Americans who are meeting that goal so that they would have, for example, an emergency fund. And healthy living, you see things being pretty flat across age. And social engagement is slightly worse in older groups than you see in younger groups, although they're pretty much the same, except in social engagement, the people who are most socially engaged are the age group of people who have kids. Right, so this is why, right.
But 75 plus is 0?
No, it meant for the social variables, we didn't have
got it.
that age group.
Okay.
What we had to do, I should have said this, what we did after that meeting where we identified these variables, we then began this kind of iterative approach to see if there were data sources, longitudinal data sources, where we could really look at these over time. What we ultimately wanted to do, and this is what my recommendation would be for the dashboard, is to be able to see how we're doing over historical time. So when we only look at age, my concern, if we were to just say how many people are walking, it's very likely to go down because of the aging of the population. And so it's going to look like we're not having an effect where we might be having an effect. So what we did here was to compare 2 different time points, and that varied again by data set and when these data were collected. So in healthy living, it's 1999 to 2011. And here for healthy living, broken down by age, if the lines are going up, it means more people are doing this, and if they're going down, it means we're getting worse. So that gives you this right track, wrong track. For healthy living, you don't see much change. For financial security, big decline. And younger adults, less so for older adults. And this is really a story about Social Security and having some base income, whereas younger people wouldn't have that. And in social engagement, what we see the group that's declining the most are boomers, which is concerning given that we think we could use or tap the boomers as a social resource that can improve communities. It looks like they're becoming less engaged, less likely to talk to their neighbors, less likely to have meaningful conversations with others and so on. So in this sense, it looks like they're not doing as well, and that potential is somewhat worrisome for the future. Then we can look at specific variables and again break it down further. So the way that we've done this is you could break it down by race, by education, by gender, and see these variables within those age groups. So this is, do you eat the recommended amounts of fruits and vegetables a day? And what we can see here is that people are getting worse over time, not better. But a glimmer of hope here is that people who have dropped out of high school are actually, young people are doing better on those variables now than they were 10 or 20 years ago. There were a number of variables that looked like, exercise too was one that looked like you were seeing improvement in young people with low levels of education, which was really encouraging to see. But in most of the age groups and education levels, we're not seeing that kind of change. And just to give you one other example, this is sedentary behavior. And so here, higher scores are bad, the amount of time. But what's happening here is, whereas in eating, you see people with college doing better than people with less levels of education. In sedentary behavior, it's people with a college education. Again, not surprising. We sit all day and jump, and our, as they call it, the new cancer risk factor is sitting, and so there we're seeing those changes. But what I like about this approach is we can look at change over time without confounding it with the overall aging of a population. And it also allows you to, again, target a specific age group on specific variables. So, all I wanted to say. How's that?
That's pretty awesome. Thank you, Dr. Carson. And there's a website with all of this on it, and I should say that Jalou Streeter here probably has a lot to do with that, and yeah, a lot more than I do, so maybe I should actually go down to the table.
So let's just, 5 minutes of questions for Dr. Carstensen and Dr. Ragland. Thoughts, comments?
I don't have a name tag, so I'm just going to raise my hand. I actually have a question for Dr. Ragland about about the traffic, the travel limitations. And I think a lot of times, if older people know how to call a lift, I think a lot of their problems will be solved. And so I wonder whether your team is working on like giving some kind of technical lessons to the older population, how to use smartphone and how to call, how to use Uber app or Lyft app.
The answer is we've done a little bit in that. We have a guide to transit, guide for older driver travel, I showed, and things like that. But yeah, teaching people to be able to use, I mean, here's a personal example. I don't know how to call Lyft or Uber. I should, right? So my daughter does it for me. And she says, oh, I have to go to the plane when I visit her. She says, I'll get Uber for it. Oh, are you going to be ready in 3 minutes? Obviously, I've got to learn how to do that. And if I do that, maybe I can write something that could help people like me. But there's other things going on in transportation. Some people call them revolutions, shared mobility, some of those things coordinating different transit. And of course, we've got technology coming down the line. Nobody knows quite how quickly, but without a doubt, it's going to be disruptive in ways that we can't quite predict. Some people think there's going to be some negative consequences of increased congestion. But on the other hand, if you could call up as convenient as Lyft to ride somewhere, it's hard to not be for that. So the answer is yes. We haven't done as much training, but their AARP and AAA have done a lot of that, as I think we've kind of heard here. And one recommendation, which we also talked about this morning in the SHSP, is to explicitly recommend an expansion of those programs and also an evaluation of, and as I mentioned before, whether those get out to rural areas as well as, anyway. So,
And I'll just add to that and say we're beginning to see somewhat in California and nationally that health plans are beginning to, that offer supplemental benefits like transportation are beginning to say it's actually cheaper for us to call them an Uber and more convenient for everybody. So that's another
If I could just quickly add to that, Carrie, I'd recommend you check out a study that AARP Foundation released with the Center for Body Computing that looked at United Healthcare actually conducting a study around connecting older drivers through Lyft to doctor's appointments as well as things, grocery store runs, things in their area. One of the things that I would caution against Lyft and Uber or shared mobility is going to solve everything, is that there are disparities that exist for that, for people who can't afford perhaps to do that. There are communities where Uber and Lyft simply are not available. And then there's also challenges with disability, access to vehicles that have that. So I think that that's one part of it, but there are, as David mentioned, the 3 revolutions, including mobility options, that play a significant role there, not just shared mobility solutions. And travel training is one of those, which David actually mentioned.
Can I ask Stacy, do they have on Lyft an option for getting a handicapped?
Yeah.
Okay.
some places.
Yeah, but it's not exactly.
But there's also a lot of discrimination. So a friend of mine who uses a guide dog, they see the dog and they cancel the ride.
Right.
Almost every time.
Yeah.
So there's no built-in safety net for that kind of discrimination.
Well, anecdotally,
Isn't that illegal to cancel?
it's actually,
Service dog?
Yeah, it's illegal.
But they don't get fined, but there's no enforcement.
Yeah. Donna?
The only thing I would caution, or that I think we need to keep in mind, is that sometimes the social engagement feature may override convenience. Right. So that, yes, my mom could probably use her smartphone, but she'd rather call me because that's a reason for her to call me.
Yeah.
And in some communities, that may be, as we get older, we find excuses to call people and stuff. So it becomes a little point of social engagement, socialization. So we have to, I think, look at that combination for people too, because I could learn how to do it, but I'd rather be able to talk to somebody.
Just a reminder that the private market will fill in some of these voids too, that there's actually a service called Go Grandparents.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to move right along. We have Stacy Moore from AARP, who is an expert in all things livable communities. And she's going to be talking about AARP's Livable Community Index and then bring us into our conversation where we really are going to talk about some concrete measures.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we can advance to might I use your clicker?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah, that would be great. Then I can actually.
Look at
go ahead and
technology,
do
here we
that.
go.
So, in wanting to look at another model of a data dashboard that already exists for looking at specifically goal 2, which is livable communities and purpose, wanted to take a look at the livability index that's been mentioned before. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background information on the index itself. It is a web-based tool that enables individuals and policymakers to evaluate their communities based on a broad set of indicators. So the tool scores communities for the services and amenities that affect people's lives the most. You'll notice that the tagline is great neighborhoods for all ages. And that's because one of the unique contributions of the index is that it measures communities at the neighborhood level. So there are a lot of great indices that are out there, whether it is walk score that gives you nationwide data, but it's limited to walking and transit, or you'll have community features like the Minneapolis Health Communities Assessment Tool, which measures a broad set of indicators, but it's focused on simply the communities in Minneapolis. The Livability Index actually looks at all 200,000 plus neighborhoods across the United States and allows you to compare them to each other. So it's the scope of it that's rather unique. So it was designed by our Public Policy Institute with both policymakers and individual residents and users in mind. It serves all age groups with a special focus on measuring how well communities are responding and adapting to older adults as they age. So it shows what communities look like today, and it's also designed so that a resident could go in, put in their city, their state, their county, their neighborhood, and see how well their community is really doing in meeting the needs of the older population and preparing for the future. So some background, we had a bit of a conversation earlier around metrics, policies, things that we might consider for the development of the data dashboard. So a little bit about how that came to be with the Livability Index. It actually is for AARP, one of our major livable communities and age-friendly community investments. It's the first index that measures livability across a wide range of indicators, as I said, for more than 200,000 plus neighborhoods. It includes 60 indicators that are measured across 7 categories of livability. There are more than 50 different data sources that are utilized to compile the index, and it includes 40 metrics that measure what's available on the ground today. It also includes 20 policy points that communities are able to get if they adopt policies at the city or state level that would specifically enhance livability. So all of the metrics and policies within a specific category of livability provide the basis for evaluating livability for that category. And when determining which, what are the principles for metrics and policies for inclusion, our Public Policy Institute determined that the metrics must measure community characteristics rather than individual characteristics, since this is about measuring communities. It should also measure characteristics that make a community more livable if improved, right? So they have to be relevant to state and local policymakers, and it has to be subject to direct or indirect influence by state or local policymakers. So no matter how much we would like to, we cannot influence the weather, but we can influence.
You are AARP.
Even we cannot influence. But weatherization or disaster emergency preparedness, that can be influenced. And when it comes to indirect influence, that ties to things that are really controlled by the private sector, but which local governments or jurisdictions have an opportunity to influence. So for instance, the number of grocery stores that are in a specific neighborhood, that's a private market decision. However, putting policies in place, zoning that would attract grocers, the outreach to them, that's something that could be influenced by policy. When it comes to the policies that are included in the index, so they're policies and programs that advance livability. They have to be created and implemented at the state or local level and affect an attribute of livability. And since it's harder to find databases of national databases of local policies, most of these are state level policies. Lastly, when it comes to policies, they have to be measurable on a binary system. So good policies, right? Communities with good policies or model policies would get credit for that policy. If there's something incomplete or non-existent, or if it's poor policy, that would not get credit within the frame of the index. One of the other aspects is that the measures have to have a meaningful amount of variation across different geographies for metrics. So if a metric has similar values across all geographies, it really is not meaningful, so that wouldn't be included. And then individual ordinances, things of that nature could not be included. It has to be something that's scalable and measurable by a third party. So these are the 7 categories with their attributes that are included in the index itself: housing, transportation, neighborhood, environment, health, engagement, and opportunity. And you can see the various attributes within each of those. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into each of those, but I'll just say a quick note. Housing has come up in the conversation today. So housing costs, right? We heard that as a potential indicator. Choice and accessibility are critical features. And ensuring that housing has opportunities are available for people of all ages, incomes, and abilities, no matter their current or future situation, is something that the livability index would take into account. Similar with transportation, do we have access to transportation options that connect people to the activities, whether it's economic opportunities or whether it's medical care? And are there low-cost alternatives that are accessible and healthy to things like driving a vehicle personally? I will say one quick note, since we want to take a look at both the built environment and the social environment, I'll make a quick note about engagement. So for social engagement, looking at things like access to internet, civic engagement, and the individual's opportunity to really feel connected and feel welcome in their community help lessen social isolation, and they strengthen the greater community. So those are some of the factors that are taken into account. One thing that you'll note at the bottom of each of these categories is commitment to livability. It appears in each category and because of the cross-cutting nature of the work, but it actually only receives one overall policy point within the frame of the index. And really what that refers to are member jurisdictions of AERP's network of age-friendly states and communities, or a comparable network that AERP is able to track. So the index was released in 2015, and in 2018, the Public Policy Institute made an update that has new enhanced features, which includes updated data, the ability to see past performance indicators, so the ability to measure specific metrics and policies over time. Is something that is a key feature. And you'll see some of the other updates that are available there. The one note I want to make about past performance and updated data is that in a couple of instances, new data sources were used to get better, more refined data. And in that particular instance, if a specific indicator is impacted by that, and we don't have the ability to measure over time because of that, that's noted within the index. So, a little bit about understanding what is in an overall livability score. So the score of a selected neighborhood, whether it's a city, county, state, or neighborhood, is rated on a scale from 0 to 100. Now that is based on the overall score of each of the 7 categories of livability within the index itself, which is also scored from 0 to 100. Communities are compared to each other. So communities that are in the middle range of the score would receive a score of 50. Those who are more advanced in a particular area will receive a higher score. Those that have some work to do would receive a lower score for that category. Again, all scoring begins at the neighborhood level. So the important thing to note about this in the context of a conversation like the state of California is that all communities within a particular boundary would have to receive a good score in order for that score to roll up to a statewide level. So the greater the boundary definition that you look at, the harder it becomes to achieve a higher score. And I do just want to say that what you're seeing on the screen is a screen capture of the livability index score for San Francisco. So do not be discouraged by the score based on what I just said, and also the fact that San Francisco was the highest performing large metropolitan area in 2015 for the entire livability index.
Congratulations, Shereen.
Good job. And so that's population, cities with a population over 500,000. And I'll also note that Berkeley made the top 10 list for communities that are mid-sized, so the 100,000 to 500,000 category there as well. So the point is that even communities that are doing great, every community has room for improvement, no matter where they are in that with the index. So I was going to actually do a quick demo of the livability index itself, but I thought we might get behind schedule. So instead, I'm just going to walk you through a couple of slides that show some screen captures of what I was going to demo. So the next couple of slides really focus in on a couple of the domains or categories that are included within the index. So again, we're looking at San Francisco here, and what I've done is clicked on the transportation category in order to see more details about transportation. So on the metrics tab, what you would see if you were in the index is the overall community score and how it ranks in the top, middle, or bottom third for every indicator within that category. And those are denoted by, red for bottom, yellow for middle, green for highest third. I'm sorry.
Everyone's creeping closer.
Yeah, that's really tiny. I apologize for that. If you were to click on the little plus signs, which you can't see, but are to the left of each indicator, it would tell you more about the score for that particular indicator. So there are two tabs within each category. This is the metrics tab. On the policies tab, you would also see listed what policies were in place that the community received points for related to that category of livability. Each policy that is in place gets an additional point for that category score, contributing to the overarching score. So here you see that San Francisco is in the top third for transportation. You might not be able to see it there, but it got a score of 86, which is huge. That's a huge score. And you would be able to see the individual metrics contributing to that score, like frequency of local transit and ADA accessible stations. There's only one metric that's in the bottom third, and that's congestion. And then, which, yeah, everyone, right.
From all those Ubers and Lyft.
Yeah.
Can't have it all. Can't have it all.
And under the policies tab, you would note that there are 4 potential policy points in the category of transportation, and San Francisco has 3 policies in place that get them a bump in those policy points as well. So moving on really quickly to the social environment, let's take a little bit closer look at engagement. So since goal 2 is livable communities and purpose, in the context of the livability index, purpose is primarily going to be, but not solely, but primarily measured in the engagement category. So if we took a little bit of a closer look at the engagement score, it's right dead center at 50. And that means that it is on average for communities across the nation. Exploring a little bit deeper into why that particular score, we would see that opportunities for civic engagement and the voting rate are well below the median. And the number of cultural, arts, and entertainment institutions is right at the median. The social involvement index is in the bottom third, but access to broadband costs and speeds is in the top third, so they kind of even each other out.
So Stacy, how is that, because I know San Francisco really well, how do you get those measurements?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So one of the, I wish I could dive in and expand the little metric tab to show you. But I will actually take a quick look at the, let's look at the broadband one, connections and speeds. So the data for that actually comes from the FCC.
Yeah, that one I understand more.
Okay.
That one I can understand completely. Okay. I'm thinking about the other ones like social engagement, for instance. Like that, I'm wondering how you gather that.
Right, how you gather all that. So there, There are a couple of different indices, actually, that the livable communities incorporate. So let me do a quick focus on engagement for social involvement index.
Stacy, is it helpful to try to broadcast a live webpage?
It might be. We have it pulled up. I don't know how well people will be able to see it, but I'm happy to walk over there. Okay.
We'll try.
So if you look at the social involvement index, the actual indicator is the extent to which residents eat dinner with household members, see or hear from friends in the family, talk with neighbors, and do favors for neighbors. And the data source used for that is the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Volunteering and Civic Life in America data, which is available at nationalservice.gov.
Okay, that's, because I know the numbers of who we're serving, and I know we're serving literally 1 in 4 older adults in San Francisco, which is really high. And so they're engaging with our programs, all those people are. And so that's obviously not captured.
Right.
It's a different kind of question.
Right.
Okay.
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
And that goes,
Finish.
just really quickly, and again, this goes to our conversation around what are the right indicators that we would want to include for California in an index. That might not be it, right? And that might not be the data source that we would want to utilize in order to develop that for the dashboard for California. So when it comes to social involvement, when it comes to civic engagement, and it comes to indicators that would decrease isolation, what would those be, right?
Also, are these indicators optimized for a certain demographic? I just looked up all of my addresses that I lived in the last 5 years, and they all fare pathetically, like they're all below 50, they're like 40. I looked up this address, and it's 50. Yeah, this is Palo Alto. This is not a livable place. I wonder if it's because of the cost of housing, or is it something else?
So, and if you actually, housing, I'll say for California communities, housing is a huge hit when it comes to the livability index. You'll note, and I see you just pulled up, which community did you pull up?
But this is my home. What do you mean? I need to make better choices.
Well, again, for this particular community, housing got a score of 27, right? So when you think about affordability, when you think about the diversity of stock, right? What are, I think it may have been Jeannie and I talking last time about missing middle housing, right? What's the diversity of stock that's out there? Are multi-family housing units available? How accessible is the housing? These are all considerations that would be taken into play with the index. California is unfortunately not quite there across the state, in large part due to the housing cost burden, which we all know is a major issue. So is there another?
Before, in your reply about how you measure social engagement, do you have those data available for every community in the country?
Yeah, so one of the things that the great folks at the Public Policy Institute who developed the index, we had to have data available at the neighborhood level, or at least the city and county level, for every community in the United States. So it really is sticking to a lot of publicly available data. There are some private data that we purchased for the index.
But we know for every community in the United States that people are helping their neighbors.
Well, again, it depends on the indicator that you're talking about. So for the volunteering survey data that I mentioned, that takes into account, that's a nationwide survey that's conducted, I think, every month or every other month for 60,000 residents across the nation. So it's a very robust data set. I know that we're kind of running short on time, and I'm happy to talk maybe offline a little bit more about.
I'm just thinking you end up with some tiny cells when you look at a community, say a rural community and
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And the policies are things that you collect through your policy arm, right? Because that's kind of a different.
That's right. That's absolutely. So for instance, if we, I didn't do it, but if we were to go back to transportation and you click on the policy tab at the top of the transportation section, scroll up a little bit, click on policies, right there, yep, you got it. Click on the plus indicator under safe streets, that there's a grayed out section that says there's a policy in place, you would see there that local and state complete streets policies are in place. Therefore, the community gets a bump for that because of that particular policy.
So these are state policies that have been enacted in communities.
Or cities.
Or cities that have been enacted. That's pretty granular then.
It is. So if there is a data set available for city policies and a city has a policy in place, that's factored into the index. If the data is only available at a statewide level, but a statewide policy is in place and communities are implementing that policy at the city level, then they would get the policy point for that community.
I think
It's
it's
really amazing the data.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how many, a few more slides, do you want to keep going and then we'll open it up?
I
or-
do have just a few more if I could
Great, yeah.
bust through those. So, and actually before that, so one of the things that's available on the tool itself is a do more with the score feature. And I wanted to highlight this because there's several things that you can do to alter or look at in a different way the livability index score. So it's a little gray box that's in the lower left-hand side, and it says do more with this score. And one of the things that you can do is customize the score. So for instance, if housing and opportunity were two domains, two categories of livability that you cared more about, you could increase their importance and give them greater weight within, and put less importance on other categories that you deemed less important. There are also features like tracking progress over time, comparing communities side by side, and also comparing map data side by side. The livability index uses a lot of demographic data for map layers that actually aren't calculated into the index score. But to your point, Zia, about like what are you looking at for a community standpoint when it comes to demography, right, in a particular community? You could look at that in relation to the category score by applying map layer within the tool. Okay, so quickly moving along. Applying the livability index, right, in a practical sense. So one of the things that the index is great for is, again, it's not just solely focused on policymakers, though it very much is a primary focus, but also community stakeholders and residents. So let's say a community advocate wants to make streets safer for residents. They could go onto the index and take a look at information about complete streets policies or older adult pedestrian fatalities that are calculated within the index. Or a county executive or staff member wants to know more about how they can meet the housing demand for the growing number of older adults that are in their community. The livability index could provide information on the types of housing that are currently available within the community and about affordability of the local housing options. I did want to make a quick point about measuring change. So there are actually several jurisdictions within California that are members of the network of age-friendly states and communities that are utilizing the livability index as part of their baseline assessment data for their action plans that they develop for the 5-year age-friendly cycle. So communities like Fairfax, Berkeley, La Mesa are using those for their actual action plan baseline data. And then you have communities beyond California who are using the index as a measurement tool as well for action planning. So communities ranging from Miami-Dade, Atlanta, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and then you have entire states like Alabama who's using the transportation indices to measure their statewide transportation performance evaluation. So there are different ways that the index itself can be applied as a measurement tool over time. And then, of course, as we've seen in previous presentations, in 2015 and 2016, the California Health and Human Services Agency and the California Department of Public Health recognized the livability index as a community-based health innovation that advanced the Let's Get Healthy California initiative. So that's just a quick look at how it might be used. And with that, I will encourage you to go to the livability index and find out more about your community.
Dr. Ogg is already there.
It is amazing.
I already tweeted on Long Beach, thank you so much. Which is a great feature, thank you.
Yeah, share your score, that's another new.
Are you okay taking a couple questions on the livability index before we get into the dashboard? So I don't know who is first, David or Jeannie.
And people, and on the phone as well.
Oh, and there's people on the phone.
I just have a very quick clarifying question. Earlier you said there are 200 communities.
200,000 communities, neighborhoods, more than 200,000 neighborhoods across the United States that are categorized within the index.
200,000,
More than, yeah,
and that's all the communities in the U.S.
correct.
Okay, so that clarifies it, thank you.
I just wanted to ask, maybe you said this before, when is this updated? Is this annually updated?
So, the last update was just made in 2018. It's been in existence since 2015 and has gone through 2 cycles of updates since then. I'm not sure that I could give you a future target date for the next update, but it
Sounds
is
like every 2 years.
Couple to 2
about every couple of years.
Yeah.
Kind of mapping almost after, like in a year or so of
The
scorecard.
and that, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the data sources are going to be mapped less frequently.
Absolutely.
At
Absolutely.
yourself, you're using from Dartmouth Atlas data, that's
Right.
not mapped every 2 years.
No,
Yeah.
and again,
That's amazing.
it depends on the data source,
Yeah.
what we're able to
Very
update
cool.
in the
Very
next
cool.
data set.
Yeah.
I think just the number itself is a little confusing, but when you dig into the individual
Yeah.
categories,
Right.
it's
Very
very.
Right.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? I had also looked at some scores that didn't seem
Makes
right to
sense.
me. They seem like great neighborhoods and they got low scores. But listening to you today, you do see when you dig in, you understand why, right?
Right.
And you can modify it.
Right.
But are consumers educated about how to think about that? So when you go to the homepage, do you tell people that before
Yeah.
they start, like, know that?
Great question. Yeah, there are actually tutorials on the site. So and I didn't get a chance to show you that, but if you were to go to the main livability index page, there are various tutorials and context that talks about how to use the index, what's in a score, you know, why these 7 categories, what makes a community livable. So all of that is there.
Should we take a couple questions on the phone?
Yeah, just one person has a question. Derek, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Is he on mute? Sure. He might not have mic capability, but his question for Stacy was on the city data. Cities are constantly changing their ordinances and creating new programs. Some of these require a new ordinance, and some do not. How is the ARP livability score capturing all of the programs and policies that a given city has? The 480 seems like a Herculean task to capture and update that data. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'll say that there's no way we'd be able to capture every ordinance and policy that every community in the United States implemented. And so that's one of the reasons that local ordinances and specific programs that might be focused on a particular community aren't eligible for inclusion in the livability index, because we have to be able to compare comparable programs and policies across jurisdictions for the nation. That's one of the baseline levels of principles for application of data within the index.
Good. Yeah, 2 points, Stacey, and thank you for clarifying that there's now some evidence about looking at change over time. That's been the basic challenge to the program.
Yeah.
Coming from GI, Grant Makers in Aging, and WHO.
Right.
Could you clarify the different sub-metrics within that, and has the AARP team looked at specific measures that are really the strongest indicators? Because there's also been the challenge that some people take this as a checklist, which it doesn't work as. So is there a subset that have been proven or shown to be actionable that can actually be used with not only within the 7 categories, but then within those elements within it that could be highlighted and considered by this group as here's a subset that could be readily implemented?
Sure, that's a really great question, and we have seen movement within a couple of categories, including transportation is one of them. But I want to preface that by saying that one of the challenges with kind of looking across like that is where the differentiation between communities and where they choose to put a focus. When it comes to terms of, let's say, policy enactment, or even if you see a wave of state policies that are similar, right, across the nation being enacted that are incorporated within the index, each community gets a point of a policy bump for that. So, we can look a little bit deeper, and I can do some work with our folks in TPI to bring more information back to this group about not only the transportation ones that we've seen, but where we're seeing some additional movement. I would caution that the context for that is going to vary depending on the community. So one of the factors is thinking about communities that have already made a commitment to becoming more age-friendly by joining the network of age-friendly communities. They've developed action plans in place. They've selected categories or domains of livability where they're actually making very specific interventions over time in order to increase their scores and in order, well, not solely, but to increase the livability of their communities, which has the impact of increasing their score. Let me correct myself right there. So I think that there's going to be some difference probably too with some of the communities that are really focused on that work at the local level.
Thank you for the great data. So I'm just wondering, is there any effort being put on evaluating the effectiveness of public programs? So for example, I used to live in a little town called Wheatville in Pennsylvania, and in our city we had a lot of potholes. And so that definitely affects your livability index. And then so probably the mayor of Wheatville would look at the index that we did terribly, and let's put in more money to fix the potholes. And so I'm wondering whether you could like connect your index with local, I don't know, like local government expenditures. And then maybe 2 years later, you can say, well, you spent 100,000 or maybe like 1 million, and how much have your livability index changed? I mean, it's probably going to have a lot of local resistance.
It's an interesting proposal.
Let me just check in process. Here we are. So we have a couple people's comments. We've got a couple more slides as you pivot us into what could this mean for the dashboard. Yes. And at 4 o'clock, we're going to switch to our guest speaker. So we got time. We got time. So what should we do?
Can we just move? Are you guys okay? Will there be more?
So Fit, can you do your next set of slides, which is
going to be real?
Because this is you've seen it. Now, can we use it? Is that what we're doing?
Well, in a way. So, and really what we wanted to focus some conversation on was really the indicators themselves that we want to start considering for the data dashboard. I wanted to provide a couple of other resources as a frame for measuring livability that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. You may already be aware, but in case you're not, these are a couple of resources. I believe they were packaged along with the pre-materials. One is evaluating your age-friendly community program, a step-by-step guide, which was developed by the Portland State University Institute for Aging for AARP. And really what it does is serve as a primer for jurisdictions who are making a commitment to be a part of the network on the whys, whens, and whats of evaluation, as well as walking through selecting the inputs, outcomes, outputs that will, constitute indicators that they could consider for their action plan moving forward. The other one is measuring the age friendliness of cities, which was developed by the World Health Organization, which provides not only a framework, but a set of core indicators, including equity indicators, for consideration for jurisdictions who are engaged in this work as well. One other quick highlight as resources is the fact that currently there are 44 cities and counties in the state of California that have already committed to becoming age-friendly. 19 million California residents live in a jurisdiction that's made a commitment to become more age-friendly as part of the 5-year cycle of continuous improvement. When communities finalize their action plans, we post them to our website. You can actually go on and see the individual action plans for a community and what specific goals and measurement they're using in order to advance their age-friendly efforts locally.
Well, and do you want to mention legislation?
Yes, I will mention the legislation, AB 1118, which was enacted, it passed last year and was enacted, that encourages California to become an age-friendly state within the network of age-friendly states and communities, which is one of the reasons, and I believe the specific language includes consideration within the master plan conversations to put forth a recommendation that California join the network. So there's that as well. And so I just really quickly wanted to show a couple of quick examples from those action plans that tie to potential measures and indicators. So one of the things that I would also encourage us to look at is what can the state do that can, and again, others have mentioned this previously today, that can complement or drive the action that's already going on, right, at the local level in jurisdictions across the state. And one way of looking at that is by looking at some of the goals and actions that communities have identified as their priority areas. Within the framework of age-friendly communities, there are 8 domains of livability. Every jurisdiction has the opportunity to select which of those are going to be their focus areas, or to add a domain, such as emergency preparedness, to that list. So this is West Sacramento. One of the domains they chose was transportation. And one of the goals that they selected was to adopt a bike, pedestrian, and trails master plan with a safe routes for seniors chapter. And then you'll see the list of specific actions that they plan to take over 5 years in order to achieve that goal. Another one is to adopt a master plan that includes innovative transit options that benefit older residents. And you'll see the specific measurable actions that are attributed to that goal as well. So that's the one example of one goal from an action plan from one jurisdiction in the built environment. In the social environment, taking a look at Chula Vista, what they decided to do was combine the domain of respect and social inclusion with the domain of social participation. And so this relates to purpose. And so what they identified as one of their goals was to develop culturally and age-appropriate programming throughout the city. And then they detailed 4 specific actions that they're going to take over the next 5 years in order to achieve that goal. So when we start to talk about interventions, and when we start to talk about, what are the indicators that we want to drive to, the action plans that are in existence and are available online could provide a great frame for some of that discussion as well. Moving on to what we really wanted to focus the next, 20 minutes on? Half hour. Is the candidate measure tracker. So before we start diving into a dialogue around what measures might we consider, what data sources, do we really need to continue to take a look at? We wanted to talk about the candidate measure tracker itself, which was that Excel spreadsheet that was sent around. And special thanks to Terry Shaw, who put that together.
No, you put it together. And we're also calling it the template. It has lots of names.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a document with many names.
So what we did when we took a look at this template was to look at the work that Z had already done in that first iteration around health and housing that West Health had put together, and then also the conversation that Gretchen, who just stepped out of the room, led last month around LTSS data and what's available through CHIS and other things, and say, okay, what are the categories of information that we need to consider capturing? And then now let's start to populate into a template what are some of the potential indicators, right? The potential metrics that we could start to talk about. And I just want to put this out there as a reaction, document, as well as to start percolating thoughts about what we could do. So the point has been made already today, and I'll reiterate it, that these types of metrics are not tied specifically to a specific recommendation within the master plan as of yet, right? But as we do the work of building the plane as we're flying it with the other committees, what are those indicators that we need to be considering? So the first thing that we wanted to do was to agree on a common template that we can all use moving forward that would really enable us to be working from the same kind of source material, and wanted to provide an opportunity for feedback from all of you on the design of the document itself. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, because you can't really see it in full.
It was posted with
there.
additional materials,
Okay.
with the meeting invite.
No, sent out to us on Friday too.
Yeah.
So, so we just wanted to get some initial reactions from folks and hopefully gain consensus around using one template. Hopefully this template, some version of it that we modify moving forward for our work.
And I would say that what we're really going for here is maybe, if you think of it as an Excel file with candidate measures that really tracks and gathers everything we've considered. It's sort of a history of what has been considered by the committee. It is not everything. And then another sheet, which is the work of the group, probably going forward outside of this meeting, to say, okay, these are the actual ones we do recommend for moving forward for the dashboard in October. Is that?
Yeah, this is the universe of what is possible at this point,
or at least that we've discussed.
Right.
You know, we're not going to be able to boil the ocean, so, you know, at least capture what we have talked about, and from there, do what we were talking about earlier about trying to narrow it down.
So regardless of what's on the screen right now, are you thinking that every recommendation that's come in would be identified here? So for example, I know that they're on that questionnaire or the request for recommendations. There were metrics that were requested and person-centered evaluation items. Would all of those be included for us to consider?
So, do you want to go?
No, you go.
So there are really two major tracking efforts that we're trying to do. One is to track all the recommendations across the board, and to track these indicators. And so there are some recommendations that are about indicators, and so we'll capture them in both places. But the point here is, like you saw me earlier in the updates when I was trying to reflect some of the Wednesday webinar stuff. The point is to try and, as we hear about, here's a point of data that might be important for us to keep track of, you know, to pay attention to as we move forward with the master plan, to capture all of those thoughts in one place so that we have a pool to draw from. So that's the concept.
So the recommendations that had indicators is part of that pool. That's one of the.
Would be on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's work in progress, but yes.
And the indicators from the Wednesday webinars.
Correct.
Indicators from subcommittee meetings, indicators from,
Exactly.
And again, this is just the starting of the population of that for what you would see in the document.
Right.
So one of the things that was mindful for me when I was looking through the measures is what are measures in the sheet that are appropriate for this goal 2, as opposed to those that are appropriate for, I think, goal 4.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like that, so, you know, housing burden, I think, housing cost burden, for me, felt, you could put it other places, but it's like, there's value for me about putting it in goal 4. Because it is about housing, but it really is about the economic burden that housing is creating for an older person. So thinking about those elements in that way, I mean, this is a really, really rich sheet of information. Like, I mean, in many ways, we have a lot of data in a lot of different places, and it's like, how do we construct some of those pieces together to make meaningful information for the dashboard?
Absolutely.
You know, I don't know if you had any particular thoughts as you were walking through this sheet yourself.
Yeah, I did, and as a matter of fact, I think we hid some of the sheets, or some of the columns rather in the sheet, just for ease of right. But tying a specific indicator to a primary goal and a secondary goal is one of the things that is one of the columns that's hidden right now.
Got it. Okay.
But yes, absolutely.
The other thing about the template, I'm sorry, is just in terms of what the equity work group is doing. So I think one addition to this should be, I don't know if it's a bunch of different columns, but if we're looking at this data source, can it be cut by
Yes.
poverty?
We've talked about it.
Yes. We have indeed. It is getting very low.
The hidden ones already.
Right.
So we hit a lot, but it's very low.
But data is recommended. Actually, there's a column around limitations, and then there's a column if you, you know what, I'm sorry that I hit all those columns. I was trying to make it easier for a conversation for today, but I just made it more difficult. So there's also things like, once we start determining, how feasible, right, is this for the near term, for the long term, so there's all kinds of factors that we can consider for each candidate measure. And to Gretchen's point, where's that measure best suited to tie? Because just in the context of livable communities, the fact that there are 8 domains of livability that cross over into things like economic opportunity, that cross over into health, we have specific goals around that. So would we want to narrow the focus within the livable communities section for terms of the data dashboard itself, not, for the scope of the plan, but for the terms of the data dashboard to those other indicators?
Well, one question about this is some of these measures are the livability indices refer to the community. So if one lives in Walnut Creek or somewhere, if you click on your address, it's what goes on in the whole community.
That's right.
And same with transportation measures. So it's really clear that within any community, there's a vast variation across geographically and demographically. So is there, I don't know if these could be more specific to census block or something like that. Or let's say we know the distribution of age by census block group and could calculate that. And if one could link it to census block group, now maybe most of these you couldn't, but that would be the level that impacts census block groups that have higher number of seniors or disabled. But
Right.
So I don't know the degree to which that's possible I would imagine with some of these measures, maybe, but generally it refers, so San Francisco, for example, has vast differences between neighborhoods, and well, any city, obviously, and also demographically. But let's say you have the livability index for a particular city, good housing or transportation, but then that applies to different age groups as well as
Absolutely.
geographically.
Right.
And so if one wanted to target either geographic areas or demographic groups, one might want to work toward a refinement. These are wonderful, but one could want to be able to target both those dimensions somehow.
And it's a good suggestion. We are taking comments and feedback on our site around the livability index itself. But I do want to pull out one of the things that you mentioned for the actual data dashboard for California development, and that is what's available at the census block level, right? As well as the data around age, demographic, other factors that impact equity. In the candidate measures document, we do want to be able to track what are the equity, or what are the different issues at play, what are the different ways that we're able to categorize data and, look at different data sets, look at different data points within the set, right? And so age would be one, ethnicity and race could be another.
Rural, urban.
Right, exactly. So when it comes to census block data, it depends on the data source. So for one of the recommendations that Terry mentioned earlier was looking at data that's already being used by California, including American Community Survey that does get down to the census block level. So that is, when we talk about transportation, something that, within the livability index, some of the data, let's say, comes from the highway, what is it? called? The traffic safety, the Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So,
Yeah, it's from NHTSA.
So that's going to be a very different look, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we just have to determine as we're going through the candidate measures, which data sources are going to be ultimately included.
We can get crash data down to the lat long.
Right.
Or within 100, within there, but, and stuff.
Yeah.
But,
So I think my comment is along the same lines that you were saying, but from a different perspective. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we lose the forest because we focus on the leaves. So we have to have the ability to look at a high level and then drill down. I agree with you. But we can't just focus on the drill down view either. It's like Google Maps. If you had all the street addresses of every corner available on the map, and that's what you saw, you couldn't tell what state it was. You need to start at the state level, then to the city, then to the town, and to the street address.
yeah.
Yep, and I think that's how the dashboard should sort of function. People just want to look at the state, they can see it.
Right.
They can see, are we doing better, are we doing worse?
Well, we've done a lot of analyses like this.
Yeah.
What's really fascinating is that you find variation at every level you look. So you look globally. If you look at states in the United States, you find vast variation among states in traffic crashes. And then if you look within states, you find the same it's really fascinating. If you look at individual communities, you find that variation also. I think it's this property of systems at different levels. You find a repetition of pattern. And the most striking aspect of that pattern is variation. So yeah, but anyway, that's the issue I would think about is when we think, for example, of unsafe intersections. So what we do is look pretty specifically. It doesn't really matter. Well, no, it's important to look at the combined intersections in the city, and there'll be some sort of score. But then what's more critical for people who are walking is the ones that are within walking distance of their home.
Right.
And so yeah, you do need all levels. That's for sure.
So one of the things that I think, and we want to dive into even more of a discussion around the individual indicators themselves. I'm going to turn in a moment to Jeannie for that, for some frame for a conversation for that. But I know we have a couple of more comments, and then I wanted to see if we could actually gain consensus on using the tracker itself as a group before we move on to that discussion. So how do we want to? Leah, did you have a comment?
Well, no.
One question and one comment. The question is, do you have any of California's tribes enrolled in livable communities?
That's a really good question, and no, I would say that because no. We don't.
Okay.
But by the way, we do a lot of work. We do a lot of work for road safety in tribes, and we're doing about 15 community assessments at tribes around the state. And I've been actually seeking out somebody in the tribal community through the National Indian Justice Center. But I'll continue that because I think it's critical. I mean, I agree with you. I'll help work on that if.
Yeah.
And then sort of a meta comment is not a research comment, it's an organizing comment, which is what to do about indexes that already exist that have so much use and buy-in and replication, and how much energy we spend tweaking it, supplementing it, going, and it's going to come up again in the Elder Economic Index, I think, that,
Right.
and probably others that you all are well aware of. So I just want to name the elephant in the room, that if the purpose of the master plan is to create dashboards that local communities do planning around, that is happening here. So not to short circuit, but just to surface that.
Well, I think it's about how does the master plan dashboard create the visibility for that tool so that it can be utilized. So as people enter, people see the master plan through a communications exercise at a local level, then they have recognition of like, oh my God, there's this livability index, and I should type in my zip code, and so that's what it shines a light on. I think that's right.
And I don't mean to say that it does. That means we don't do anything else on housing, transportation, social engagement. But then we have to think about how we're having multiple things.
Right. So like how many neighborhoods are there in California? Let's say that there's 300. I don't know what the number is.
I think it's like 400. I don't know the exact number.
scale, okay.
So then maybe it's on the dashboard, it's 40% of California's neighborhoods meet this score,
Right.
meet this threshold.
Right.
And then you have an opportunity to click on that and then drive down to your neighborhood. So that's at the dashboard level. I mean, it's just something to think
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
How many
yeah.
counties, I mean, I like neighborhood better because I think it's more localized, but it could
It
be
can
how
roll
many
up,
of
too.
California's 58 counties
Right.
meet a threshold score of 60.
Mhm.
Not very many, probably. You know, I mean, I don't know what it is, but
Unless there's a tremendous advantage to reinvent the wheel, let's not do that.
No.
Yeah. So, and again, I would.
Teachers to say that?
Yeah, that's why it was October.
But again,
Somebody
so
tweet
again,
that.
so and again, you know, when we're looking particularly at, with the equity lens, right? Because demographic factors aren't calculated into the index itself, is what else, what's the supplement? What's the
What's the
supplementary
extension
data?
that adds value?
that adds
Yeah,
value, that-
yeah. Because that might be that we won't be able to extend deeply on the 400 neighborhood level, but that we could extend on the transportation district level or the county level based on other presentations, so that there's other looks, but we're not, that they're supplements or extensions or something.
Or even roll-ups for specific populations, if we wanted to do that.
True.
Yeah, maybe you go back to ARP and they'll do it for us.
Yeah.
There you go.
That'd be nice.
well, call Rodney.
Exactly. Rodney would be happy to have a conversation with you about what all was included in the development of the livability index.
I do want to recognize Dr. Branca, and you're going to talk as well, so, right? So,
Yeah.
I just had a quick one.
Yes.
So I wanted to loop this discussion back to what Laura was talking about.
Right.
In perhaps thinking about focusing some of these variables around the communities that are most in need.
Yeah.
The most vulnerable population groups and where they live, because that will make the biggest difference from an equity standpoint.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
So bring in this equity lens.
And actually, I think that's a really good segue. Jeannie, I'm gonna push you on the spot. But she I think I had something about this. So one of the things that Jeannie actually started to take a look at was what are those specific, because this is a look at very specific data and indicators that could or could not tie to a recommendation in the master plan at this time. What are those broader, for lack of a better word, sub-goals, right? What are those specific attributes that we want to drive to in terms of measuring the master plan, and how we could start to frame some of that moving forward. And so I'm going to ask Jeannie to talk a little bit about some of the thoughts that you've had around that before we hopefully talk about maybe a couple of specific indicators.
Yeah, I'll just have a couple minutes, but I just want to say that about 20 minutes ago, I wrote down, Kim, don't reinvent the wheel. I promise that when we started this process, you said, there are all these opportunities for us to integrate what else already exists. And I think that what ARP has already done is such a great starting point for us.
Oh, my God.
So that we could say year one, this is the baseline. And as you have said, there are going to be incremental changes at phase one. How do we go deeper? How do we do better each year? So I would very much support the idea of, and I'm sure there are political issues around this, I don't know, but I would very much support the idea that we start with year one using livable communities, and that California become, to me, that's the big goal. California is a livable state, and all these various indicators are achieved at some level, as Gretchen suggested. Maybe it's 40% of all communities by 2030, and maybe it's 50 or 2025 and 30% by another time. So just to think about the measures, I think that this is a really great framing for us to begin to think about what are we looking at in each of the goals.
Right.
And so what's put together here, from my perspective, and as you can see up on the slide, if you can see it, the housing and neighborhood, elements, these have, they're a starting point. So some things may not be what we want to have on the dashboard, but maybe there's a drill down for that. So the first one up here is zero-step entrances for housing accessibility. That has very important implications for certain populations and maybe not for a broader population. So that would be perhaps the kind of thing that we want to make sure we have access to, but maybe it's not on the dashboard itself, kind of a drill down. So this is really intended to be a starting point for us to think about. And if I think of all the things that have been said today from the various presenters, there are many access points that could be extenders, as Kim, I think that's the term used a few minutes ago, or that we could drill down deeper in as we move forward, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and add different domains for us to consider with some of the information. For example, the comparison data that you had earlier related to blacks and all the others. Was it blacks and whites? Blacks and whites. Blacks and whites. Yeah. I mean, things like that where we want to be able to drill down. So I don't really have anything more to say right now. I do know that this is not all the recommendations that have come in, not all the recommendations on indicators. That's why I just want to comment that everything is not up here yet. So as we have 50 for neighborhoods or 50 for housing or 50 for transportation, some of them will probably start to rise to the top where we have 3 or 4 indicators for the dashboard.
Okay, so we have about, yes.
I realize the other, this is a small p political answer, but I would like to also lift up our partner departments metrics. So if housing department and transportation department and our mental health departments are tracking things by age or are not, I'd like to also feature and encourage that work. So yes, and extenders again.
So we have about 6 minutes left in the conversation for this section of the agenda. And Jeannie, I think I'm going to just go ahead and leap off of your comments around, is a particular indicator, it might be right for some populations, perhaps not right for the overall dashboard, but we would want to drill down. As we start to look at these individual indicators and understanding that in 6 minutes we can't talk about probably even one category fully, is there, for instance, if we were to start with transportation, let's say, since building off of some of the information that David provided earlier today on transportation, do we want to have a quick conversation on when it comes to transportation, what are a priority frames that we would want to consider for the indicators? Like what rises to the level that we would want to put on a dashboard? Is that the conversation that we can focus on in 5 minutes time?
You want to focus on the template.
Yes, the indicators that are in the template.
Do you have the graphic that can go up as a whole Excel spreadsheet? Or is it probably not meaningful right now?
Can you put the Excel spreadsheet up? It'll take a minute.
Okay.
I have a question for maybe Kim and Terry.
Yeah.
Do you guys see as the categories that are going to be, like you were saying, how many people meet the status, stats on the dashboard, and then the indicators are sort of one level down? Because it'll be difficult to pick one indicator for a category, because you may run into an issue where that maybe just like that doesn't apply to a population.
Yeah.
So you might want to have 4 or 5 indicators, and then the one category score that's represented, and then your data is more robust. You're not, getting into the small cell size issue. Discrepancies.
Sure, absolutely. And so building off of that, so for one category, again, let's just go with transportation for the sake of this conversation. What are the, if we were to have, let's say, 3 priority areas, safe streets, being one of them, accessibility transportation. I am making this up.
Good job.
Being another one, right? So what would be the indicators with those priorities that we would want to drive to? And I think that's kind of where we want to start to get to go in the in-between work between our committee meetings moving forward.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you have a list like this for transportation?
It's in the spreadsheet, a starting list, and then what we really need to do David's presentation today, I think, listed several possibilities for indicators and data sources at the person and system driver level that probably need to be included in this. Recommendations that have come in to the master plan haven't been included in this yet. This is just a starter list.
Right.
Well, safety could be very straightforward. So we'll do a draft of a couple of safety measures, pedestrian and occupant, and send it to you to see how it fits. And very straightforward. And,
So from a process perspective, it's only 5 minutes.
yeah, that's 30 seconds.
Each of these categories being disaggregated, a subgroup, review them, identify those elements, send it back within 2 weeks for review, and bring them all back rolled up for next meeting. I mean, why, I think,
No, that's a great idea.
isn't it worth
Absolutely.
having the sub-experts
Yeah.
put up a straw man first?
I think that that is exactly what we're planning. So we look at this meeting as sort of idea gathering and bouncing ideas. And then the 4 people who we have may or may not have agreed to do this, which is Stacy, Laura, Jeannie, and David, moving forward with not only with our support, putting together candidate measures as well as what are our actual recommendations here. And I think that that's the next step. Where you report that back to the group is it March, is it April meeting? I'm not sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we do it by email.
And so I would add to that, so for folks who are leading different aspects of upcoming discussions in the next couple of meetings, right? And who are experts in the fields of, economic security and health, it would be working together in the time frame between the meetings to start building, using your expertise to get the information into the document for the broader team to be able to continue to react to as we build it moving forward.
And David, I meant David Ragland.
He knew.
I'm happy to share it with.
We just need it.
Dr. Lynchman had a panic attack there.
So, and in response to your other comment, David, yes, we just wanted to take one category, one indicator as an example to have a conversation around what the conversations in between the committees would look like to build out.
And I think we need to take back to whether it's helpful to each time do the week before kind of review, or let 1, 2, 3, 4 get going and then have a sum up, or so we'll do some meeting mapping.
Right now on the March agenda, I have some time for LTSS, which we'll have already presented to the LTSS committee, and to come back and do some report out at our March meeting. And then, because there's not committees for Goal 2, it's working with the folks on SAC who are on that work group. And we can host meetings, we can host Zooms, we can support that in whatever way.
So shouldn't there, couldn't we at the next meeting, though, have, if we're together for 4 hours and we spent 1 hour on each goal and looked at these in a very disciplined way, either through a ranking process or if the committee comes back, the subcommittee, whatever, comes back and says, these are the 4 or 5 recommendations we think should be on the dashboard. And then those 4 or 5 recommendations for the indicators are talked about in that hour. What will this drive, what will be missing, and that we use that time only to go through the goals in the dashboard rather than to have a lot of other things going on around it, if possible.
Yeah, we were planning, that was sort of, if we do sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, that would happen on the natural in May, but I think given this feedback, we want to see maybe we can do it sooner. Maybe we do 3 and 4 together, or, let's think about how to get to that synthesis piece sooner.
I'm thinking maybe April could be feasible for at least, we're going to do part of that in March, as Carrie just said, and then maybe do a little bit more of it in April.
We'll do some homework on how much, some of it's about how much work gets done between the meetings.
Right.
A lot of it.
And it's how much work is being done by the other groups.
To be ready.
So that's why it's not so easy just to do it all in one day.
Right. So, Janet, please. So I think it's great to do the work in between the meetings, but I also want to make sure, because people put a lot of work into recommendations, and there's a lot of measurement tools in there. and a lot of potential indices that are already being collected that are not being looked at for these purposes, et cetera. I want to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, that we're going to use what people have already submitted. So there's kind of a, you know, a process question about, do we divide up and ask people to do this stuff now, or do we want to make sure that all the stuff and the recommendations are in first, and then look at it?
Yes, the latter.
Yes.
Okay.
We can fill all the recommendations.
Well, no,
So then that means
it's
that
sort of
we need
parallel
more
tracking. I
time,
mean,
right?
our staff is pulling and building all that. Webinar Wednesdays are pulling in more. LTSS report is being multiple inputs. So all these, so sort of how do you get the small work group on research and the inputs?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And also, from a practical perspective, you know, we want to capture everything that we can that's coming up in the discussion. But we don't want to belabor things that don't need to be belabored. So if we can quickly say, we know we want these 3 things, and we can build out our knowledge about those 3 things, and determine really whether, yes, as a practical matter, we can or can't or should or shouldn't, then let's do that, rather than spending all of our time knowing everything about every possible candidate measure to maybe not use it.
I mean, could we, we have a couple of kind of subgroups already, and hopefully we're developing a couple of more. Could we take a look at what's come in as far as the recommendations and the public comments and all of that? And so that sub-teams can start now and not wait till May?
Absolutely. That would be tremendously helpful. Especially I'm talking about how, like, you know, the thing about health and the measures, like, it'll be interesting to see what are some of the recommendations.
And for the group that's working on health, it would be great to interact with Marty, Maya,
and Fernando
Torres-Gill, who are already talking about what the MPA is going to look like and around goal 3.
As a reminder, every Wednesday webinar, I'm going to keep plugging it, Jen's not here, so I'm being her proxy. Every Wednesday webinar, there is a segment that is summarizing on this topic, here are the recommendations that we've received. It's a summary, but it at least gives you a sense of what we're hearing from folks, because we really are listening to people, and so that comes in on every, so as you are preparing for a meeting on a particular topic, that's why I came in, did some updates about those Wednesday webinars, but, you know, you all can be looking at those too, or listening in, because there is actually a lot that.
But also to clarify, so when Nina and Jenny are running Livable Communities work group, they got all recommendations went to them. Now I hear you saying the 4 research people also want all of them, at least the ones that have data indicators.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can do that.
You're ready. Okay. Health aging.
We're at time. 5, should we?
Can I say one other point? I just want to, because it's something you said surfaces for me. I would say in general, our dashboard as a state dashboard will not be scoring. It will be presenting data for people. We tend to not rank and score, but I think this is, again, a pre-existing, well-adopted, AARP endorsed. It has a score, but I think I heard you, at one point you mentioned developing a score. I think that's less where we're going, maybe again in the 1.0, but sort of that is it creates a whole other level of politics when you create a scoring and ranking that we're really trying to shine daylight at this point.
Right, but again, in the vein of not reinventing wheels, if there are things that already exist out there that you all think we should be paying a lot of attention to, let's just endorse that to go into, reflected some way in the dashboard. So that's on the table.
Speaking of wheels, I almost put this in my PowerPoint. There's a picture of somebody with the wheel, and they say, "No thanks, we're busy."
Literally.
I almost put that in my PowerPoint. I thought it'd be too pointed, but I'm glad you all bringing this up.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, so you mean you can or can't use the livability index ranking?
I think that score has been enough vetted and bought into by half of the state of California, and I think that one is over the threshold, but in general,
Just
getting
in
a
general.
scoring system over a threshold is a high bar. Takes a much more consultative stakeholder process to.
Especially if we're inventing it ourselves.
That's what I mean, yeah.
So no more, but this.
Well, again, there's difference in creating and leveraging. So I think a score is appropriate for leveraging a well-developed well. I think the state creating a score to rank communities against each other creates a whole other.
I'm sure Derek would have something
I'm waiting
to
for
say.
Derek to raise his hand for our county partners. That's a much more involved stakeholder process, and it has a role sometimes, but it may not be necessary.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
that was
Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey, for your leadership. And AARP.
I think that Laura and David and Jean, wow, thank you.
All right, so do you want to do the introduction of Untweety.com and the team?
Sure.
We're thrilled to have another look at livable communities with an equity lens, innovation lens, a person-centered, data-driven, technology-driven lens. Carrie, you've been prepping, so take it away.
So I want to introduce Untweety.com and Ekta Shah, who are, Untweety is from the Social Innovation Lab, University of California, San Francisco, and San Francisco State, and a co-founder of Streetwise. And Ekta Shah, who's also from Stanford, from the Participatory Technology Design, and also a co-founder of Streetwise. They were named by the Obama administration Innovators of the Year, and they are here to talk about ways that they use data and technology to lift up more vulnerable populations that often don't have their voices heard. So take it away. We're doing a little different here. I think they're going to be on video. So this is going to be us moving toward our.
We're trying.
Well, greetings, everyone. Can you hear my voice?
Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie, for the warm introduction, and greetings, everyone. We're really grateful and honored to be here. First things first, we are very technologically sophisticated, but unfortunately, the technology video on your side is not working. So you're not going to be able to see our faces.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're only going to hear. But if you are able to fix it on your side, let us know, and we're happy. We want you to see our faces, and we want to see.
Maria is shaking her head, so I think that we're just going to move forward with your voices.
All right. So voice to voice. All right. So, yeah, we've come here today to really talk to you all around what data for equity could look like in terms of building age-friendly cities and livable communities with our states and, of course, our nation's most vulnerable population. As Carrie said, I'm a professor and founding director of the only joint research lab between UCSF's medical school and San Francisco State's only College of Ethnic Studies in the United States. And we're both co-founders of Streetwise. And my lab, the Social Innovation Lab and Streetwise, both really focus on human-centered design, participatory technology, and real-time data. And we came here today to really share some ideas about how to help our state's most vulnerable populations build better age-friendly cities and communities, more targeted resources for aging in place, diversify power and leadership, transform popular media portrayals, particularly around equity and people of color aging, and changing the narrative. And we've been working in the area of healthy aging and age-friendly cities for quite some time. Our work has really focused on the social determinants of health. And as you all know, the social determinants of health argues that it's not just people's genes that determine their health, but it's the conditions in which people are born, live, learn, work, play, pray, age, and die. And our work has recently, and actually for a while, really been focusing on the structural determinants that drive the social determinants of health. So there's lots of work that has been done on the social determinants, but far less on the structural determinants, and those are institutional racism, implicit bias, class oppression, gender discrimination, sometimes religious discrimination. And those really power and influence the social determinants of health, but we don't have enough conversation about the interaction and the intersection between the two. And the structural determinants impact not only access to institutional resources and privileges for our aging populations, but also aging populations' needs and unmet needs and the effectiveness of related interventions. Our local work in Oakland has really focused on 8 age-friendly city domains, ranging from health and wellness, parks, transportation, many Many of these you all have been talking about in your own dashboard, all the way down to community information. And there we've been working with the Oakland Mayor's Commission on Aging, as well as the Department of Planning, as well as the Department of Transportation. And some of the key questions that we've been asking that we think might be relevant to our conversation today are, how can technology solutions be used to build age-friendly cities with vulnerable populations? How do you create and plan for all aging services that promote equity among seniors? How do you address social isolation? How can you all work more effectively with stakeholders to build capacity, fill data gaps? How do you create a data dashboard to track different aspects that includes community-driven data and big data, and that allows the integration of the two? And what we've learned in our own work, and you all already know this, but it's worth going over, California is projected to age faster than the nation. The number of people in California, those over 65, will double over the next 20 years. 80% of the growing elder population is this forgotten middle, 10% at the top, 10% at the bottom, but what about all the people in the middle? And we know that this 80% of low-income older adults currently face barriers in accessing institutional resources and privileges, and that these barriers vary significantly by race, class, gender, disability, LGBT, et cetera. So we think this is important to you all for two reasons. First, you all, as key decision makers and key stakeholders, currently lack crucial information on the health status and functioning of older populations, their needs and unmet needs. And even when the data does exist, it's not always collected in a form that's comparable across time, place, and space. And what we really want to bring to your attention and focus on is this data invisibility gap. We think that what we've seen from listening into your earlier conversation and looking at the sources of data that you're using, we want you to be mindful that secondary data doesn't tell us the whole story, and that this lack of information could be a major barrier to the development and the evaluation of appropriate policy and programs on population aging. So we think the real challenge that this committee and working group is facing, one of them, of your many challenges, is how do you integrate lived experience? Are you laughing with me, or?
We have many challenges. You hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
Yeah, many challenges, yes. Many challenges. But one of the challenges is, how do you integrate lived experience and community voice into existing planning processes to build age-friendly cities or communities with these populations who have been locked out, right? There's so many populations that are locked out of these conversations that we're having, which is why we're grateful to be invited. Folks who have been locked out of health equity conversations, sustainability conversations, shareable city conversations, smart city conversations, and social justice conversations. More to the point, we don't really think we've correctly identified the problem. And we think that you're done in Bradstreet data, your Esri data, AARP does an amazing job and gives you all that amazing baseline data. The California Department of Public Health, who we are currently working with, the CDC, who we're currently working with, Census, HUD, EPA, all of these different forms of secondary data on the left-hand side. We think they've done a brilliant job, an okay job, or quite frankly, a lousy job, depending on where you're sitting at the table, at the equity table. Those entities and organizations have done a brilliant job, an okay job, or a lousy job of setting top-down ambitious goals for the design of age-friendly cities or communities. And we refer to that top-down, secondary data-driven goal setting as the hardware. And when we look at your data dashboard, we see a lot of hardware-infused data resources. And we think that that's powerful and fantastic. But we think what's missing, and for you all to think about, is the power of place, what aging populations, senior populations care about and know to be happening on the ground level. And we think then the real challenge, another challenge of your many challenges then, right, for the 21st century health data revolution that we're all a part of, is how do you bridge this gap between official knowledge, which is primarily driven by secondary data sets, and local knowledge in ways that make the data more valid and reliable, authentic and meaningful from the perspective of aging populations and seniors themselves, particularly our most vulnerable aging populations. And we think the missing link is equity, or what we call tequity. Our method of creating more equity is called people-powered placemaking. And that's real-time two-way communication with seniors and other communities so they can participate in the design solutions that meet their local needs. And the way we do that is through, we've developed a mobile app called Streetwise. It's a mobile mapping and SMS platform that collects real-time information about how people are experiencing spaces and places, and it turns those into actionable analytics. And another way of thinking about it is right now you all probably have good geospatial data, as I've seen in some of your questions, like proximity to parks. So yes, we know that my grandmother lives near a park, and that's great proximal data for this committee to know. But what's even more important for this committee to know is what is my grandmother's experience in that park? The experiential data. Is that the park where drugs are sold? Is it safe enough for her to bring her grandchildren to the park? Is she not crossing the park to get the important meds that she needs to stay alive or to keep her diabetes away? We don't have the experiential data layer. We have proximal data in our data dashboard, but we don't have experiential data. Streetwise allows you to collect both proximal data and experiential data, and you can toggle between the two as you wish. And in doing so, we address these two key questions at the bottom of the page, which is how do you democratize data, which we think is part of data for equity, and how do you democratize decision making? You can imagine Streetwise, and I only need a few more minutes of your time, giving you a 360-degree view of what's happening beneath regulatory data sets. For example, how walkable is my neighborhood? Right now, if many of us wanted to find out very quickly how walkable is a neighborhood, we might use something called Walk Score. We know Walk Score very well because they were invited to the White House with us for the White House Opportunity Project. But Walk Score doesn't differentiate between different kinds of amenities in neighborhoods like liquor stores and corner stores. So you could be living near a food swamp or a food desert and have a high Walk Score. Or Walk Score doesn't say on the way to this meeting, if you were cutting through an alley in East Palo Alto, where my uncle lives, so I'm not putting down East Palo Alto, just saying the old East Palo Alto had more crime than Palo Alto. The men had no problem walking down that alley, the senior men in the room, but the senior women would never walk down that alley because that's where folks were getting robbed and harassed. Where is that kind of data, not just neighborhood level data, not just county level data, but point level data being picked up and collected in a systematic way around the social determinants of health and the structural determinants that are driving those social determinants, whether we're talking about public transit, I'm going counterclockwise, safety, affordable food, where do I go if there's an emergency? What kind of childcare can I trust? What issues do people really care about in my community? A quick example of how Streetwise works in action, what you're looking at right now is the available data. This is what the mayor sees, this is what you all would see, for the number of so-called grocery stores in East Oakland. As you can see, the purple dots represent grocery stores, and you can see that East Oakland, according to the available public data, is obviously a food oasis. Ha, ha, ha. But when you ground truth that data with Streetwise, what you realize is that those are not, in fact, grocery stores. They're actually liquor stores or corner stores, and only a handful of them are actually grocery stores. And with Streetwise, you can upload pictures, audio, video, and it's a multilingual platform. And if you're trying to reach some of the fastest growing demographics in California, you have to have a multilingual platform. Because of our ability to collect real-time data, to integrate community-driven data with big data and predictive analytics, and to create an early warning system for the upstream solutions for the social determinants of health for aging populations, the Stanford Social Innovation Review has referred to us as a Waze for communities, a Fitbit for neighborhoods, or a Yelp for everyday people. A few examples of our work, and then I'll close. We have partnered with Google and another company called Acclima. What we did is on top of Google Street View cars, we put air quality sensors as those Street View cars drove through West Oakland and other places. We were collecting data on black carbon, NOx and OX. On the back end, when you found a black carbon hotspot, the Street View car is going too fast to tell you why it's a hotspot, so they called Streetwise to ground truth that data. And what that means is that we're collecting one of the most valid and reliable data sets on the relationship between asthma and air quality with low-income populations that you can possibly get. In Oakland, we're mapping the geography of homelessness with senior populations. Who better to transform homelessness than homeless people themselves? We're working with the Oakland Department of Transportation. In terms of affordable housing, we have partnered with Enterprise Community Partners. They are the largest affordable housing provider in the country. They launched a opportunity index on housing, powered in part by Streetwise, so we're providing them with real-time data on housing. We're helping them build out an evidence-based assessment framework and a community engagement and partnership toolkit. We're working with the state of California around access to fresh and healthy food, and we're doing anti-gentrification mapping in San Francisco. President Obama did name Ekta and myself as two of the world's top innovators at the Frontiers Conference. Lots of other great publicity for us here. But in conclusion, we want you all to think about how are you measuring the number of resources for elderly populations in your communities? How are you measuring experiential data and adding experiential data to your dashboard? How are you thinking about targeting culturally and community responsive approaches for appropriate services? We see a lack of data around diversity, equity, and inclusion, dignity of care, respect, race and place with aging populations, and we're excited to help you fill those gaps. And of course, we see a lack of community-driven data that can be integrated with big data and predictive analytics so that we can actually have an early warning system for many of these problems and stop reacting, but be proactive when we make the master plan. We're gonna stop there. These are our key recommendations, but you can see those later on when you look at our PowerPoint, and we wanna open it up for Q&A. And we wanna thank you all for your time. And we are excited to hear any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Okay.
David Ragland.
Yeah, very interesting. We have a research group at UC Berkeley, and we're developing a tool called Street Story, which now that I see yours, my guess is that it was inspired by your tool. It's a little narrower. We're looking only at safety from the perspective of users, just exactly like yours. And people go on at a real point on the map and then put in information. And then, you know, there's a platform and so we're just developing that. And at some point I'd like to contact you because we're in the process now of reaching out to different communities, including tribal communities, to find out how you disseminate knowledge of this and stimulate interest. But anyway, really interesting.
Oh, thank you so much. I do hope that you do contact us. We recently won a Robert Wood Johnson Pioneer Award to do this work, and we're in year 2 of that award, and they've asked us to reach out to indigenous and tribal communities as the next iteration of the award. So that might be something that we could do together. That would be exciting.
Absolutely.
And we will connect you.
Look at them also putting it on the
right
real time.
I know.
Real time.
Yeah, we're on press.
We will. In fact, we also just got a Robert Wood Johnson Pioneer Award to reach out to tribal communities. So let's definitely collaborate. So we will.
I will connect you.
We will definitely, contact you.
We have another question from Shireen McFadden from San Francisco.
Hang on, was there
David, one more thing. We are partnering with Mark Stacy on a number of NSF grants. He's in your engineering department at UC Berkeley. I think we submitted three or so. So we will also keep you posted on those.
Mark Stacy, okay, good. We'll be in contact for sure. Great, thank you.
This is less of a question and more of a comment, and that's that, I'm sorry, I'm Shireen McSpadden from the San Francisco Department of Disability and Aging Services. And I think for me, this is what's missing in our conversation, and I really appreciate the presentation and the thought about how we gather this level of information across California, because I've been thinking about a lot about it, and I know that, you know, your presentation, which was fantastic, Stacy, just thinking about how we, you know, we need the big data, we need also, though, this kind of inclusionary aspect, and we need to know at the neighborhood level how people are experiencing aging. And you know, I know just in San Francisco alone, it's such a diverse city, and there are neighborhoods that are food deserts, and there are, you know, and when you look at the city data, it might look very different. If you look at it, you know, from the AARP score, particularly, it's going to look very different from if we actually get user information. So I'm very excited by that.
Yeah, please follow up with us. I mean, we would love to launch. Disability populations are often always left out of these conversations. It's been super frustrating for us. It's a population that we love and care about dearly, and we would love to partner or collaborate. So looking forward to that conversation.
Well, and I think, you know, more, it's really planting really great seeds for us that we have strived to have, you know, the master plan for aging process has had this together. We engage higher level of engagement, different levels of engagement. The webinar Wednesdays has had different level of interactivity. So this notion of, could we even think about the dashboard having interactivity and person-centered is just a really wonderful stretch goal, and we can achieve it. But I think that putting some heads together about what would that look like to not just aggregate all the data we already have, which is a big goal, but to think about a dashboard differently. So that is, it's lots of seeds planted today that we'll continue to work with you on. So not to cut it off, just to, Stacy.
Really wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. This was really great, and echo Shireen's comments around, you know, this being a big part of the missing piece, right? Because especially when we talk about diversity, when we talk about equity. The question that I had was in relation to, you know, data application. So, you know, taking a look at the slides where, you know, it was the grocery stores that weren't grocery stores, as reported to the county, and to HUD, you know, what type of application has gone on from a policy perspective of data veracity and validation of, you know, like influencing, hey, guess what, groceries, you should not be listed as a grocery store. Are there any, you know, things that you can share about application of the tools to influence policy or anything else that you might speak us to?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. And just for
that was Stacy's
great question.
And Stacy Moore from AARP California.
Voices are blending together. And this is Ekta. I don't know if you all have heard my voice yet. But the application of the data has been the most exciting part, I think, of the work that we've done. In this particular grocery store example, within a couple of months after this data was collected by the community, there was a farmer's market that opened at the local high school, Castlemont High School in East Oakland. Liquor store owners also became aware that there was a market for healthy food. You know, a lot of the local corner store and liquor store owners, the data that they're looking at is their purchase data. And if the things that are being purchased the most are candy and alcohol, then those are the things that they're going to buy more of. And so a few of them were able to use this data to get refrigerators and food crispers so they could carry healthier food. And it was a win-win for the community and the liquor store owners. And then on a policy level, this data was used by the Oakland Unified School District to put forward a multi-million-dollar public bond measure, I believe Measure JJ, which passed, and it was for a central kitchen and food commissary that serves the entire district with healthy food, not just during school hours. but it's also accessible outside of school hours for the whole community. So those are the types of sort of program level, business level, and policy level applications that this data have had.
Did that help answer your question, Stacy?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So one more question from Laura Carstensen, from also here from Stanford, and then we're going to go to public comment.
Yeah, and these are just quick. It would be nice to use this approach to evaluate interventions that are put in place. So when changes are made, be able to get a glimpse of what that means for users. And that would be, I think, a great use of it. And I forgot the second thing I was saying. That's good for all of us.
More cookies.
There.
Yeah, well, that's a great comment. A quick comment on the comment is we are working with the California Endowment as part of their evaluation of the building healthy community sites across the state of California. So we do have a lot of experience in that domain, using the platform around evaluation of KPIs, ongoing monitoring, measuring, and metrics. And we'd be happy to have that conversation.
I remembered my other.
comment.
And a colleague of mine in Germany said that there's a mayor and a few mayors in small towns who hire recent retirees to go take photographs of problems in the neighborhood. And then they invest in hiring the same people to go fix them. So they'll say, like, there's this intersection that's really problematic because you can't see, and they'll get this crew to go out and do it. And what the idea is that the older people know their neighborhoods really well, and they know what these problems are, so they'll go right to them. So again, a possible use of that approach.
Yeah, we would love it.
All right, well, I want to thank you both for this really thought-provoking and great presentation. And hopefully we will all be in touch.
That sounds great. We want to thank you all. We want to thank you all and extend our gratitude. And this ability to really integrate community-driven data with secondary data is in the heart of the work we do. And we think Street Stories, Streetwise, and there's many other platforms out there where we would welcome the conversation of helping you in any way we can put together your dashboard or in the other work you do. We hope you have a great day, and we're about to sign off. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will open it up for public comment. I don't believe we have anyone in the room from the public. So we have our wonderful team of Nancy and Maria are multitasking amazingly with all the technology. I will take a crack at summarizing. Maria, do you need a minute for public comment? Hello.
But we need to take a break if we can.
Oh. Let me ask you a question. How many people are in the queue for public comment? Because we can just take a break, absolutely, and we can also check on public comment.
All right, there you go.
So if I could have 60 seconds, then I think we could be done. Is that possible?
That's good.
Unless the group's got to take a break and then reconvene. So what I am hearing for, and thank you to our captioner for indulging us to no public comment was here in the room, although we have had, I believe, 38 to 40 people listening in on the Zoom. So I saw that on the screen. So lots of public engagement. What I'm hearing is next steps, and I'll look at my colleagues, Terry and Carrie. So we have our Goal 1 group is working. Our Goal 2 group is working. We're going to get the Goal 3 and potentially Goal 4 going. I hear people saying we're ready to go. Make sure that we have the standard template. Make sure that we have all the inputs, get ready, all the inputs. And then also make sure you have your link over to your policy work group, because again, the 2, 3, and 4 work groups are just getting going. And then make sure that the equity date is on your radar, which I can't do off the top of my head, but it's coming. So we will.
The 17th.
March 17th. It's St. Patrick's Day. March 17th is the equity. So we will.
We're going to be presenting the template. to the equity.
Yeah, and showing some of what's been discussed here. So we will that's all of our like homework work, but I think we also want to take seriously this challenge for the big research agenda and how we bring that forward and where we bring that forward. Dr. Carstensen presented, just like last time we had the challenge on technology from David Lindeman, and then also this challenge on interactivity. I don't quite know who to assign that to, but I want us all to think about it, and many of us were sparking on that, Shireen, Stacy, many of us. So we will take that and continue to think about what that could look like in terms of that ground truthing, genuine engagement, DEI work to strengthen all of the work. So you guys will hold us accountable to figure out next steps on that. Other things for next steps. I do want to give the PSA and promotion and excitement about our next meeting at West Health on health and well-being in La Jolla, preceded by a tour of the first emergency room in California to receive the national accreditation as a geriatric ED. So come see what a geriatric certified ED looks like, stay for lunch, and then have the meeting. And if you can only do one or the other, that's okay too, but make a day of it in La Jolla on March 19th. Yes. And again, Carrie and Terry and I can answer any questions about that. And then after that, we're going to go to USC. So thank you to all of you for opening up your research homes. It's wonderful to be with you. Yes, in April is USC, and May, TBD. Or you'd like to keep you on your... Maybe David.
Leading Age California.
Maybe, that's right. Okay, Terry, I'm trying to start with you. Other action, next step?
No, I think that we're going to be ready for, the next meeting in March is on Goal 3, but we're going to have the Goal 1 LTSS group come and do a report back. I don't know if we'll be ready for Goal 2 at that point.
Stacey knows.
But yeah, so we have the agenda sort of set for March, and we're going to have more time to talk about actual dashboard. Fewer presentations.
We keep it every week. Every month is fewer presentations, more work time. So we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
Great. Anything, Terry?
No, just really appreciate all the great discussion today. Thank you all very much for engaging so thoughtfully on these issues. We have a lot of work to do jointly together.
But we are not reinventing the wheel. We agree.
We are not.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Stacy, for your leadership.
Yes.